We did it. We did it. We did it. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I woke up today pissed off. I don't know why. You ever have one of these days where you like wake up and you're just like, and you're mad? That's me. Today. Boy, I woke up pissed. So the solution, as always, is to funnel your energy into the arts, right? This is actually holding up its tune pretty well. Hey Vince, how you doing today, bud? Honestly, no big news going on today. Like the it's like one of these like slow ass days when people are reporting on like Justin Trudeau walks out of Parliament during question period. Like no one actually gives a fuck. That you got it, Barnabas. The solution is revolution, right? We gotta and I'll say it over and over again. We're being brought to revolution because we have no alternative. Like, there is no alternative. That the power structure and the halls of power have made it very clear that they're not interested in responding rationally to crises. So, what's left? Right? It's like that famous JFK quote, right? Those who make reform impossible make revolution inevitable. Thoughts on Russell Brand? I think that if you watch Russell Brand and you are getting something out of Russell Brand, that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. My critique for him is the same critique I have for all leftists, right? He's not galvanizing his people into the streets. Very simply, like I feel like if you are attracted to him and you're listening to him and getting information from him, great. But he's not organizing a revolutionary force, even though he would be extremely well suited for it. Because they surrounded the city, not halls of power. I'm not sure who you're referring. Are you talking about the truckers? Like the failing of this trucker protest is that it's not confronting power. It's working on behalf of power. That their goal is simultaneously self-serving and it won't work. Like, even if they got everything they wanted, it's not going to work, right? Like, the housing crisis is out of control, homelessness is spiking, like, all of these problems are manifesting, and like reopening the economy is not gonna change any of that. Nobody's showing the filthy trucker tent city and the abuse of prostitutes. Total info lockdown. Yeah, I mean, the Conservative Party has endorsed this protest, right? Which has actually made it a lot more complicated. Usually these, like, and that actually makes this protest very unique. Something that nobody is pointing out. Like, the Liberals didn't endorse the Occupy movement. They're not like when they endorse things like Black Lives Matter, it's in a very like theoretical, theory-based kind of way. Whereas like these conservatives are not only endorsing the protest, they're also pushing forward policies that are coming out of the protest, right? Like that makes it very complex, right? Because you have these questions being brought to the halls of power. And Justin Trudeau's not prepared for it. Like or interested, frankly. Like, that's why he's walking out on these guys, and that's why he's doing this kind of stuff. And I mean, part of that is just showmanship for his own base. That like he's showing that he has no respect for these guys, which, I mean... And, like, I don't like to critique protest movements based on this sort of stuff grinning, because all protest movements have them. Like, that's one of the hard realities to face about humanity and this sort of thing. Is like, it's always going to be dirty. It's always going to be grungy. There's always going to be all kinds of ridiculous stuff. These truckers are especially notable, right? They're like the learning thing for us is when we move into spaces to treat the people who live there with a good amount of respect. That's the real, like, sorry to troll, you're not trolling, bud. But like, we gotta recognize, like these guys moved into this area being like, yeah, fuck these politicians and fuck all this kind of stuff, but like they don't care that there are actually people living there. Like they don't actually care about that at all. And like I said it the other day, and I think it's absolutely the truth, that if you can't show that you're willing to respect people on a one-to-one basis, then people are not going to be willing to give you control of the halls of power, right? Like, oh, this is how you treat us? Well, I'm not going to let you write our laws, right? Like, it's very straightforward stuff. Yeah, they're crapping in the storm sewers, right? It's and that's a result of the power structure is trying to route these guys out, right? And they're finding all kinds of strategies to do it. And they've cut their resources off, right? Like they've made it a crime to actually give these guys like fuel, resources, things like this, because this protest movement has been designated as a violent protest, right? They're not treating it like a Black Lives Matter protest. They're not like, and to be fair to the police forces, right? Like, you guys know me. I do try to see this from a lot of different angles. Like, people are like, well, why aren't they going in there and just clearing them out? You know, they cleared us out. They'll go in there with all this force and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, bro. Like, these guys have guns. Like, they have guns. They've shown them to us, right? Like, they've talked about that. So it's one thing to go into like a Black Lives Matter protest and clear out an encampment or something like that. It's quite another to engage in that activity with people who are telling you that they are on the trigger's edge of shooting people and who are mistreating people and who are shitting people, right? So, I mean, that goes to show you the power of, arming, right? Yeah, of course there are. Of course there are guns. Are you kidding me? Like, you think every single one of these semi-trucks doesn't have a gun installed? Like, yeah, of course there are guns. I'd be blown away if there weren't guns at this place. I'd be completely, absolutely floored to the ground. And that's something that nobody's actually talking about. Like, this is the right wing, man. Like, this is the gun nut crowd. Like, are you kidding me? These guys are showing pictures of of bombs and stuff, right? I've shown those pictures on this stream. So yeah, the police are walking around on eggshells around these guys, right? And I don't know. is it there are lessons for the left, is how I'll say it. Hey, be nice, Grinning. Come on, let's keep it nice, okay? Let's keep it nice. I'm not interested in. I don't like arbitrating. So you guys know at 7:00, Barry Weissletter, the leader of Socialist Action, is coming into the chat. We're going to chat about this protest. We're going to get his perspective, and also he's going to let us know about what's going on in the NDP. That Socialist Action works with the NDP in order to works with the NDP in order to try to move them to the left to the degree that they can. So stick around, 7:00, he'll be showing up. Randy Hillier is just a psyop. His sole purpose is to agitate, doing CSIS's job. I mean, we can't excuse these guys anymore, man. Like, a guy like Randy Hillier, even if he is like a CSIS guy, there's still a guy like Pat King in the conversation. Like, it's not like Tamara Litch is like a good person, right? Like, I mean, have you ever used Clubhouse? I don't know what that is. Good place for debates, especially this. Beer Drinker 86. How you doing, bud? Good to see you. Islam, good to see you. Oh, man. I'm like pissed off and tired, man. Like that's how I am today. I woke up just fucking mad. I just woke up mad because it's like this whole trucker protest is distracting from serious issues, right? Like what these truckers are protesting is not actually that serious. Like not really. Like oh no mandates. Oh no, like it just smacks of privilege. It smacks of like I've never actually been confronted with any hardship in my life ever. Right? Like these guys walking around complaining that like, oh, this is like the Holocaust. This is like the Jews in the Holocaust. And like meanwhile there's like homeless people living in tents. Like the housing crisis is out of control. Right? Climate change is coming to obliterate us and burn our cities down. Right? And these fucking truckers are just like, what? What are they doing? What's their agenda? They took our gerbs. They took our gerbs. Right? Like what are they fucking doing? Do you think that Marxist-Leninists and Trotskyists can organize and agitate alongside each other in the modern era? Yes. Yes. I do think they're going to have to put aside their differences. The Trotskyists are more established. So when it comes to organizing, it is going to be the Marxist-Leninists who are going to just have to bite the bullet and just kind of nod along, right? I do think that that's the case. And, like, I'll be explicit. Like, I don't think I'm outing anything or stirring the pot by saying that, like, Barry, who's coming onto the show, is a Trotskyist, right? He and I don't see eye to eye on Stalin and Trotsky and their relationship. I refuse to allow that to prevent us from organizing because the reality is that Barry goes out onto the street and Barry is very, very excellent at organizing. Like the Socialist Action is a wonderful organization, right? And for me to just shrug and roll my eyes and be like, oh, these Trotskyists, like, no. So. Here's a clear case, in my view, of like we can organize with Trotskyists and we can have that connection, and we don't need to let disagreements about historical figures blow up our relationship, right? We really don't need to do that, and I mean my real perception of the like Marxist-Leninist, Stalinist, Trotsky conversation is that it is a bit like talking about like who do you like better, Patrick Stewart or Jean-Luc Picard or Kirk, who is the better captain, right? Like it takes on that kind of a tone or that kind of a feeling, right? And if I got into a conversation, like if I love Star Trek and I got into a conversation with somebody and they like Kirk better than Patrick Stewart or Jean-Luc Picard, and I'm like, Jean-Luc Picard's better than Kirk, like, am I going to blow up my friendship and not like organize with them or help them or do any of that? Like that is kind of how I look at it, you know? And the Trotskyists have points, and I think the Stalinists have points, and the Marxist-Leninists have points, but it's not the defining characteristics. We're still all in it. We're still under the umbrella. We are ostensibly allies with one another, and we shouldn't make the same mistakes that Trotsky and Stalin made with one another, right? We shouldn't allow it to create a schism, because that only helps the capitalists. Yeah, more MLs and Trots uniting would be nice to see. Yeah, I mean, the left does need to get it together. Like, it does. Straight up. Like, and it's going to be absolutely crucial. Like with the shit that's coming, guys, like the power structure is not responding rationally to these crises, and it is going to have profound effects. Like, even if the power structure was responding rationally, we still would, because of the momentum of all of it. It's gotten so bad, it's so rotted, that even if the power structure was being like, okay, we got to do something, we got to actually resolve this issue, we got to confront it, we got to do this, like, it's still going to be lots of homelessness, it's still going to be huge amounts of poverty. You're still looking at pretty big environmental impacts, and that's if literally everybody stopped and started to actually confront these things, right? So and we haven't even begun. Like, really, like, we haven't even begun. The idea that there is any organization still that is still pretending like these aren't important issues is terrifying. Like, it's terrifying. Like, the conservatives just outright dropped their support for any kind of carbon pricing, right? Like, this makes them unsupportable. If you're supporting the conservatives, you're worse than the Nazis. Period. And that's not hyperbolic. Like, that's not somebody being like, oh, you just call everybody you don't like a fascist, right? Even the Nazis weren't interested in the destruction of the species, right? Even the Nazis weren't walking around being like, we should destroy all human life, right? So the Conservative Party and the Republicans in the South are far scarier, way, way scarier than even the Nazis were. Like, we're entering a period of time where we get to, like, these forces are like Skeletor, like Sauron and his orcs, right? Like, that's what we are looking at. Like, doesn't matter what suit they put on. Those among them who have the articulative skills, like Pierre Poilievre, right? These are shapeshifters. Like, it's not hyperbolic to talk this way about these guys. Like, their position is, we should destroy all human life. That's their position. And, like, I'm blown away that there's no one in the media that is asking any conservative, so what's your plan for the environmental catastrophes? Like, what's your plan when the environmental catastrophes occur due to your inaction and inability to confront them? What's your plan? Like, when the city of Kamloops burns down, do you have any plans for how to deal with that effectively, right? Like, these are the only questions we should be asking these guys, because we can no longer talk to them in an effort to convince them. Now is the time to start talking to them like as if it is real, because it is, and start asking them serious questions about what their intentions are in regards to the fallout of all of this. Like, when the wildfires burned down Kamloops, when the famines spread throughout the prairies, like, what is your actual plan for these things? Like, those are the questions that they need to answer. And, like, watch them deny that it's happening. Watch them deny the reality of what is actually occurring. Like, this is what the capitalist system has given us. It's given us a power structure that is retreating into fantasy, because it can't actually confront what is real. No, I'll organize with anarchists too, bud. Like, I'll organize, if you come out to the streets, like, this is the thing, I organize with Trotskyists, I organize with anarchists, I organize with anybody who calls himself anything, right? And the reason for that is very simple. Like, if you're on the street protesting, that gives you credibility. Like, my disagreement with the anarchists is very simply that they don't go from point A to point B. They're often point Z. And they don't really want to acknowledge that, like, we have enemies that can destroy our shit. Right? Yeah, I've been to one of Barry's talks a few years back in Christie Pitts. It was great. Yeah, Barry is very prescient. He's very aware. He's very reasonable and rational. And compassionate and empathetic, like, and all of those traits are what we are looking for. So, like, a minor disagreement about the nature of the relationship between Trotsky and Stalin is, like, so at the bottom of the list. Like, it's completely out. And I think that way about the anarchists too. I interact with anarchists who are passionate, beautiful people with amazing backstories, who are strong leaders, who are fighters, who are there to help without a doubt. And you're telling me that I'm not supposed to organize with them because they think that, like, when it comes time to actually take power, we should just diffuse it. It's like, that's like, I can understand why they think that way, but it unfortunately it's not real. Like, you can't actually do it. You can't actually do it because we have enemies. That's the reason. Like, anarchists will say things like, we should abolish the CIA, and it's like, I agree. I agree, but like, you're not going to be able to do that, right? Like, there's a reality to the situation that is not, like, you can't just stand up and say, we abolish the CIA. Like, if the entire populace did it all at once, the CIA would be like, that's cute. Like, that's what would happen. Because there are enemies. Like, they're a rogue terrorist organization. Like, you're not going to be able to defeat them just by, like, standing up like Michael Scott and saying, I declare bankruptcy. It's just not going to work that way. Blocking down public right-of-ways is a good tactic, but the left only has their own bodies. That's right. Yep, the right has assets. Aren't Trotskyists anti-democratic centralism? No. I don't think that Trotskyists would describe themselves like that. I mean, certainly not anti-democratic. Like, the Trotskyists are, I mean, you can take a look at organizations like Fight Back, like Socialist Action, like, and you can see their stuff. They put it on YouTube. Like, it's visible. They're very structured. They're very structured. Like, and that's that kind of structural communication and that kind of thing. Like, a big reason why I don't, like, I let the Trotskyists do what they want is because I prefer what I do. Like, I prefer this more free form kind of organizational sort of way. But when it comes time to do that, like, Trotskyists know how to organize. Like, they really do. Like, and they're very good at it. And it's an invaluable asset. Yeah, destroying human life, open up new markets for water filters and air conditioners. Yeah, until the heat gets so bad that it blows the air conditioners up. That's the part. This is the part of the conversation that I think that, like, drives me the craziest about these fucking liberals, right? They really do think that they're going to be able to just, like, tech up. They really do think it's like a video game, and they're just like, oh yeah, the heat's going to go up, but we'll tech up at the same time, and so that'll be fine. It's like, nah, bruh. Like, nah. Like, you have no respect whatsoever for, like, the power of the sun. Like conservatives have no respect for climate, but liberals have barely any respect either, right? It's the heat is going to spike in such a way that your air conditioner is going to blow up. Like, it's not going to fucking matter. We're so childish when we're having this conversation. Like, we're really, really, really childish. Like, and part of that is because we've been lied to so effectively, right? Like, when the Trudeau government was elected, it told an amazing amount of lies, right? It told an amazing amount of lies about its dedication to fighting climate change. And the simple fact that there was a political organization that was even acknowledging that climate change was real was already a pretty big step, right? You got to remember, we went through like a period of time where the conversation was like, is climate change real? Right? And that really built things up so that finally a political organization was like, no, climate change is real. And everybody sort of assumed, we'd be like, oh, okay, good. Climate change is real. They're going to do something about it. But now we understand that that was just part of the grift, right? That just acknowledging it is that's all they were willing to do. It's exactly the way they're moving forward with truth and reconciliation. They're just like, yes, there was a genocide. That's basically what they're doing, right? So it really does show you like a good tactic, right? If you want to, you know, if you want to stall, if you want to waylay, right, people, just admit that they're right, and then be like, okay. And it just really shows you, like, this is the reason we need to surround the halls of power, because they're not listening to us. They don't care what we think, right? They only care what we think insofar as the lie they need to tell us. That's it, right? They don't actually care about these issues. They just care that we care. Yep. That's it. We treat climate change like we treat land acknowledgements, like acknowledged, right? And if that's enough, they'll just do that. Like they don't need to do anything. They don't need to resolve anything, right? And the people with power in the society are climate change denying psychopaths. Like you just need to look at them for 30 seconds to see that this is the truth. Like they're not interested in resolving this crisis because they're making money from it. And that's all they care about. They don't care about human life. Like they don't care. Like they're butthurt because they're going to be dead soon. And so they're like, well, this place might as well burn down, right? They don't care. And like the entire system has been completely corrupted. Like it can't respond. Yeah, thoughts and prayers, exactly, Islam. Like that's a perfect way to think about it. Just like literally, if all you can do is just like thoughts and prayers, and that's good enough. Yeah, you don't need to put your money on the table. Hey Watson, how you doing, bud? Trotsky's writing on the fall of the anarchists during the Spanish Civil War, probably his second best. His best are his writings on fascism. That should be required reading, right? This is what I'm talking about, and this is what drives me crazy about this. Is like Trotsky wrote some important stuff, right? So did Stalin. Like, and I find the conversation, the antagonistic conversation that exists between these two figures to mean that you can only read one or the other. And I just don't accept it. If war creates trillionaires, then human extinction will create quadrillionaires. Well, it has to, right? Because eventually there'll be so few people and there'll be so much money that of course there'll be quadrillionaires, because if there's only like 10 people left, then they can have all the money, right? Anarcho-communists seem nice. They generally seem to have a positive view on AES, even if they disagree with their implementations. Yeah, like, I mean, that should be the path forward, right? Like, and again, it really does come down to, like, what does everyone think? And there is such an issue. There is such a thing as an issue that with no correct answer, right? That we can approach it and have our own perspective, or even a perspective of like a faction, if you prefer, of a group, right? But the reality is we all come together, we talk about it, we discuss it, we vote on it, and the way the vote goes is what has to be accepted, right? Like that's the way to do these things. And there really truly is such a thing as issues with no right answer. And to divide people and to divide organizations because of those sorts of things, I think is a foolish game. Yeah, most corporations acknowledge climate change. They just don't want to pay for it. Yeah, they don't want to do anything about it. We can't have basic needs so billionaires can park their yachts in their yacht. Yeah, exactly. And this is what's pissing me off about this. It's so fucking pointless. Like, it's just a distraction. Like, it's such a wank. Like, just I want it to be over, because everyone's like losing their minds about it, and it's like what the news cycle is talking about. It's what everybody's talking about. It's what I'm talking about. And it's just like, who cares? Like, for real. Like, who actually gives a fuck about this? Oh, the people who give a fuck about it are the people who don't think that climate change matters. Like, like, I saw a TikTok today saying that Bezos' solution to not being able to land aircraft on his yacht is to get another yacht to trail behind the first one to land on. Yeah, this guy's a psycho, right? Like, like, if you want to see what happens, what capitalism breeds, just take a look at Jeff Bezos, right? Or Donald Trump, for that matter, right? Like, the system is psychotic, and it's rewarding psychopaths. Yuan Buchanan, good to see you, bud. The entire capitalist system is slowly beginning to fall apart. Yeah, oh yeah. Of course the capitalists are going to try to save it, but people are slowly starting to wake up and say no. Yeah, we should be waking up faster. Like, we need to be waking up faster than this. Like, the entire system is corrupted and can't be reformed. Like, we're not going to be able to reform this. Like there's no band-aid solution. There's no piecemeal reform to this, right? And that's going to get really obvious, like really obvious, like to the point where even like moderate conservatives are going to be like, "Yep, it's over," right? That the only people who are actually going to be fighting to save this system are going to be psychopaths. Like the analogy that I use is Lord of the Rings, right? That we need to ascend to Mount Doom and throw the ring of power, which is capitalism, back in to destroy it. But remember that the bearer of the ring, in the end, Frodo, right, didn't. He didn't throw the ring in. And in fact, the ring turned him. He wanted to keep it and even put it on in order to escape. That the destruction of the ring comes because of its most ardent defenders. Gollum, right? The twisted demon Gollum, who, in his passion and desire to claim the ring for himself, throws himself into the volcano and destroys the ring of power, incidentally. Capitalism will die in the same way. That the people who are trying to destroy it will be swayed. It will happen. It will happen. They will come to believe that they can seize capitalism and use it for themselves. But that the most ardent defenders, the psychopath class, will push it so far that they themselves will be responsible ultimately for the destruction of capital. That is the narrative that is going to come. Because capital is too corrupting, it's too powerful, it's too overwhelming. And the destruction that it's going to lay on the populace is going to be so horrific. It'll be too obvious for people. Like, why is huge sections of the society homeless while there are empty houses? Why is 60% of the society saying that it's struggling to get food? Why is rent as high as 60% of someone's income? Like, these problems are not ephemeral. They're not abstract. They're not theoretical. They're not in the distance or any of this sort of thing. These are core, basic problems. If your society is not capable of housing and feeding its citizens, you don't live in a society. Just period. Straight up. Like, a king who withholds food and shelter from his citizens is no king worth following. Just simple and straight up. And our structure, like, we're so hyper-focused on this trucker protest, but the trucker protest is just as irrelevant as it could be. Like, they're not actually calling for anything that's meaningful or is going to have an impact that is going to, like, if Timmy's reopens, it's not suddenly going to resolve climate change. It's not going to suddenly resolve any of these major crises, right? It's just not going to do it. Hey, Dan, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. There is no national solution for the international crisis of capitalism yet. But we got to do what we got to do. It is unacceptable that there are billionaires where there are people that die of starvation every day. Yeah, the scarcity is artificial. That's exactly right. Because it's beneficial to the capitalist class, right? It's like the diamond market situation. Like, there was a period of time where diamonds were more ubiquitous than the cubic zirconia was. But because of the scarcity, because of the manufactured scarcity, like, they were able to jack its price. I agree that there's no national solution, but I don't think permanent global revolution was a realistic goal at the time. And honestly, I gotta say about the permanent revolution point, like, and this is why I don't necessarily push my chips in with Trotsky. I find that the permanent revolution narrative that comes out of Trotsky is very convenient for Trotsky, right? Like, so Trotsky's position with the permanent revolution is either there's a permanent revolution that he is the leader of, right? Or there's a permanent revolution that he gets to fight ongoing against the power structure, right? So it's win-win for him. He's either the leader of a permanent revolution while also being the leader of a country, or he's the leader of a permanent revolution fighting against a country that won't let him become the leader, right? So it's very win-win for him. And instead of accepting his political loss against Stalin, he can be like permanent revolution, right? And just set Stalin as a permanent antagonist and pretend as though he's no true communist. Burning the flag for what? So you get back to a corporate pawn and consumer of capitalism? Yeah. But that's exactly it. Yes, that's the answer. They would rather burn down their own homes than forfeit their slavery? Yeah. I mean, you can take a look at we're talking about Stalin, so you can take a look at the kulaks. It's exactly what they did, right? That when Stalin was trying to collectivize the system and alter the system, the kulaks went and burnt down their own shit, right? And I don't think Stalin saw it coming. Like, I really don't. And we're seeing with this trucker rally how hard they'll fight for their own enslavement, right? Like, that's what they're doing. And these people have, like, each one of these trucks is like $1 million investment. Like, they own these trucks. These trucks aren't owned by a business and they're like renting them or something. These individuals own these trucks. It's a major, major asset that they have pushed their chips in with, right? They've bought into the system in a very big and significant way. And they're fighting for it because if the system were to collapse, then they've got this asset they can do nothing with, right? Even though, like, can you imagine if this protest was demanding the end of poverty, like the end of, like, to deal with actual climate change issues or any of this kind of stuff? It'd be very powerful. But they really are fighting for their own enslavement, which they've completely bought into. And I don't hate them for that, right? Like, it is kind of pitiable, but at the same time, like, they are in a society that's telling them to do exactly that. It's very much how I view, like, the people who get caught in student debt, right? We were all told to go to university, right? To get a degree and all of this kind of stuff. And it blew up in lots of people's faces. It blew up in significant ways. And it's the same story with these truckers, right? They were told to invest into a system that is blowing up. The theory of permanent revolution looks a lot better than the two-stage theory at the moment. Yeah, and what an oxymoron it is to burn a flag that is the epitome of capitalistic symbolism in an attempt to show your support, to get back to that very system. Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about capitalism, right? And one of the great successes of capitalism has been that there isn't really a symbol, right? Like, communism has a symbol. It's the hammer and sickle, right? Christianity has a symbol. It's the cross. Islam has a symbol. It's the crescent moon. Most ideologies have a symbol, right? Nazism has a symbol. Capitalism does not have a symbol. The closest thing that you might use as a symbol for a capitalist would be a dollar sign. But there aren't capitalists walking around wearing dollar signs, right? This is one of the great successes of the capitalist system, and one of the ways in which capitalism asserts its natural place in the world, that it's a natural system, that this is the system that any organization, if you put 100 people on an island, this is the system that would arise, right? But capitalists don't really have a symbol, and so in that way they get to remain obfuscated and operate in the shadows and operate in clandestine ways in the society, because they're not trying to push forward their ideology and rally each other with symbolism. And capitalists, really, and fascists too, really do a good job of co-opting symbols and co-opting other movements. The symbol of capitalism is the credit card, fictitious capital. Yeah, that might be a way to look at it, for sure. But like, really what I'm driving at is it's the facelessness of capitalism, right? That ultimately the owners of the society, no one knows who they are, right? No one knows who actually owns the society. That the ruling class is largely faceless, and like, for God's sakes, the wealthiest Canadian, no one knows who he is. He's very intelligent, right? It's very, very intelligent what he's done. David Thompson, right? He's the owner of the Globe and Mail and owns about 10 to 20% of everything, right? Like, he doesn't own a business, right? Like, he doesn't, like, own Bell or Telus or Rogers or something, right? He doesn't own GM, for example, right? That his strategy is to own 10 to 20% of all of it, so that if something goes down or if he pulls out from something, it's not like a big fucking news story. It's not like a big deal, right? That he can just sort of move around and be very liquid and like a shadow, right? And if you own 10 to 20% of everything, well, then you are a major player, and if not the major player. And it's very intelligent what he's done, which makes sense, because his family is literally monarchy, right? His official title is the third Baron of Fleet, and that's acknowledged by the Canadian government. Like, his father was a billionaire, and his father, I think it was his grandfather, or it might have been his great-grandfather. In any case, at some point, the Thompson family comes over, right, from England, and they just operate as monarchs, right? It was expected that Canada was going to be a monarch, like ruled by monarchs and lords and shit. Like, that's the way it was supposed to go. And for a long time, like during the American Civil War, right? Who's running up to Canada? Well, the people who are in favor of the monarchy, right? That we didn't want to have a civil war, and we didn't involve ourselves in the Civil War because we were still pro-monarchy. We weren't. Did I say Civil War? I meant War of Independence. And so our richest Canadians aren't like, the richest Canadian is not like an entrepreneur, a capitalist that pulled up the bootstraps or any of this. He's literally a guy, a hereditary monarch, like literally a hereditary monarch. And because of that lineage and because of that prestige, the monarchs know what's good for them. Like, they know what's up. They know that if the peasants don't even know that they exist, they can just, like... And, like, you think David Thompson wouldn't be able to position people in the halls of power in order to actually fight climate change in a serious way? Of course he could. Of course he could. Like, the guy has like $56 billion. Like, come on. Like, come on, man. Like, it's getting embarrassing at this point. The people who are defending this system are getting embarrassing, more than anything. Like, my big learn throughout this pandemic period has been how fucking cringy our society actually is. That the veneer, the pressure got so large that the veneer dropped. And here's I gotta get through this pretty quickly, because where I saw this, and I've always said that when I see the public expressing, when I see an honest expression from the public, I like to read it, right? Because it's very difficult to actually express oneself and then to be heard. And so when I see it, I like to say it. But this really reflects a lot of what I'm talking about. So, message to all conservative PPC voters and supporters. My life and the life of other less fortunate Canadians matter just as much as yours. And I'm so tired of divisive both sides nonsense when this is all your fault. Alright, I'm gonna go off because I'm so sick of this shit. Most people don't vote for Trudeau / hate conservatives because of some fake news or whatever Trudeau tells us. It's because of the conservatives' own action and words. I never ever would have imagined growing up that a group like the conservatives could be popular. They lack empathy and are indifferent to the point of neglect, or just downright vile to the sick, elderly, disabled, homeless. That's why they want the mandates dropped, because to them, they either don't care that these people die or suffer, or actively relish in this fact. It's absolutely fucking disgusting, and fills me with absolute rage when the mods on other subreddits let these people spew poor poison for the sake of impartiality. But the mandates were so hard on me. I'm a healthy individual and got COVID, and it barely affected me, so clearly the mandates are worse. Oh boo fucking who? A lot of us have no choice but to go outside and interact with anti-vax morons because we need food to live. Do you really think does cost of living on Scrap's disability can afford to get groceries delivered every time we need them? These fucking shit goblins think they're frustrated? I've been living every single fucking day praying that by some fucking miracle some anti-vax fuck doesn't transmit this awful disease and kill me and my family who are disabled and immunocompromised. How about my frustrations? How about my life? So I should be condemned to die or watch my family members die? Oh right, I forgot. We're nothing but leeches to society and should be downright thankful that you allow us to live by scraps. My mistake for assuming I had the same rights as you and that I'm allowed to be happy. But the vaccine isn't safe. Shove it. Just shove it. The creation risks of the vaccine have been public record and transparent since the beginning. Being easily manipulated, dumbass, isn't an excuse for actively ignoring this or believing a con man selling you magic dick pills over actual experts. Seriously, you think we even like blackface Trudeau? You really think he's some kind of messiah to us? Hell no. Fact is, even at their absolute worst, at least liberals don't make it a goal to make our lives worse. Sure, they're in no rush to make it better, but I'll easily take that over getting run over by the cons. Take a moment to take this all in. I'm literally saying we're in a situation that I'd prefer keeping one boot on my neck over adding a second because I have no choice. I hate this. So if I'm the ruling class and I see this expression, I'm giggling like a schoolgirl. If I'm David Thompson or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or any of these guys and I'm seeing this expression come out of the populace and this is like the expression, at the time this has like 4,000 upvotes on a fairly small subreddit, not a huge subreddit, right? I'm giggling. And why am I giggling? Because outright the crux of the piece is gotta vote liberal or else the conservatives will get in. Right? That's the crux of the piece. That there's no sense that both the liberals and the conservatives are allies and work together. That what we're seeing is largely showmanship, right? That, like, Pierre Poilievre doesn't care about this protest. It's an opportunity for him, right? Justin Trudeau doesn't walk out of Parliament because he's disgusted, right? It's all showmanship. It's just theatrics to try to get the right people on side. And an expression like this is, while accurate, in my view, is just buying into the idea that we should continue supporting the liberals at all. Like, and I find it very interesting that there's just no conversation whatsoever surrounding the idea that we could just vote differently. Like, we could do that, but we're not, right? Because we're not actually having a very serious conversation, because we're not a very serious people, frankly. Yeah, my body, my choice until it actually matters. There's a stench of eugenics around this anti-vax crowd and how they seem to be okay by condemning and consigning a certain part of the population to death for their convenience. Yeah, and it is convenience, right? It is convenience at the end of it. And, like, again, I'm undecided, and that's the kind of shit that makes me sick when I vote. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't really I understand why people are like, I'm a conservative and I vote conservative because a party of racists and eugenicists, right? Like, yeah, it makes sense. I'm surprised that there's so many of them, frankly. Like, I'm surprised that there's this many. That's what's always been kind of shocking to me. Like, a party whose literal, like, their mandate is destroy the species. Like, literally, that's their stated agenda at this point. Like, you don't need to do big research to figure out that that's the case, right? So, and like, in this environment, it's so easy for the capitalist class to just be like, oh, we'll just erect another party or support another party that's slightly less hysterically racist and crazy, right? And in this way, they just pass the baton back and forth between each other while the capitalists do what they want, frankly. Like, and what's the result, right? So again, this is why the solution is to surround the halls of power. Like, there's nothing left. Like, there's nothing to salvage here. What's worth salvaging? At the end of the day, this was a system that was designed for a monarch to rule us. That was the design of the system. When Pierre Elliott Trudeau actually enacted the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, he didn't protect food and shelter. He didn't protect the freedom of the population, right? He didn't protect environment. He didn't do any of that, right? That the basic rights that we have surround things that, rich white men care about. Like freedom to be able to be a racist, right? Which is what freedom of speech is these days. Freedom to exploit whoever you'd like, right? Like that. These are the freedoms that white colonialists are interested in protecting, right? Like, you should be free to be openly racist and attack whoever you like, right? Like, you should be free to do that. You should be free to organize along fascist lines, right? You should have that freedom as a Canadian citizen, and that's what the Charter of Rights and Freedoms actually protects. Like, as a byproduct, it also protects our ability to protest, right? As a byproduct, but that's not going to be for too much longer, honestly. My favorite thing is to go into subreddits that are all like, freedom of speech is what matters, and really push and see how much they believe that. Because they don't really. Like, not really. These are the people who are burning books and shit, right? Like, I don't know what needs to be said any longer. And like, here's an article that's really indicative of what I'm talking about, right? So CTV News, publishing an article, you miss a shift, you can't pay rent. Trucker protest keeping Ottawa workers from working, right? So the great injustice of the trucker protest, as far as the corporate media is concerned, is that it's preventing wage slaves from working in the wage slave system, right? This is how it's framed. This is how it's presented to us. That workers going to work is the good. And our whole society is captured by this, by the way. And I understand that I'm a bit on the fringes with this comment, but like the whole like gotta get a job, or like the jobs conversation, how everything is hyper focused on getting jobs. And politicians say it all the time. We're gonna create jobs, right? We're gonna do jobs and all the jobby job. And I'm literally to a point now where I'm like, fuck all that. Jobs? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Right? Like, how are we living in a society where it's like, oh, good, wage slavery. Good. Hooray, we created wage slave jobs. Right? Like, it's just like the dumbest shit. Like, why are we celebrating that at all? When a politician says we're going to create a bunch of jobs, we should go, boo, you suck. Right? Because the jobs they're creating are often pointless. right? There was an economist, David Graeber, who went through and said that he created a book called Bullshit Jobs. And he concluded that as much as 30% of the jobs in the society are pointless. It's like we're not having adult conversations about how to structure our society, right? We're not even trying. Like our position, even now, our position is let chaos reign. Just let chaos reign. And like that's what these truckers are all about. Let chaos reign. Right? Just open the economy, let chaos reign, right? Let the free market decide, and everything will be great and everything will be fine. And it's just like, no, it's straight up not happening. Like this system took a prosperous society and destroyed it. Like that's something I don't think anybody's really actually stating at all to these losers and hacks. Like the system in the 60s and 70s was prosperous. People had wealth. People were able to actually achieve things and do things, right? That's been destroyed. And the society is obviously destroyed, right? Obviously. And no one is actually being like, yeah, obviously this system and this ideology is a failure, right? And it's a failure completely because we used to be prosperous, right? Like for real, like if you had a plot of land and it was producing food and then you started to do something and the land stopped producing food, and your answer to that was, we just got to keep doing the thing that's not working, then you're insane. And we are getting to like an idiocracy kind of level with this, where like, yeah, we're putting Gatorade on the crops. Yeah, we're not using water, we're using Gatorade. And then if you stop doing that, it creates like an economic collapse because your people are so fucking stupid that they genuinely think that like, yeah, we'll put this fucking like Powerade drink on the crops and that'll make it grow better. Like we're so fucking dumb. And your statement here, let chaos reign or become a crypto dork. All of this crypto stuff and NFTs and all of this, right? The rise of like Meta and all of this dumb bullshit is just a way for people are retreating into fantasy worlds, right? Like the right wing is retreating into a fantasy space, right? And we can see them doing it. But the left wing is literally retreating into a fantasy space. Crypto, NFTs, the metaverse, all of that kind of stuff is literally retreating into fantasy worlds. Like not a fantasy ideology that exists like in an abstract sort of space, but in a very literal way. Instead of investing time and energy into reality, they're putting all of their time and energy into erecting fantasy worlds, right? Which I actually think is far more dangerous. Because while the right is living in an insane ideological abstract space that's all about the destruction of the species, what the left is doing, or the techno guys if you prefer, right? What they're doing is actually destroying the planet in order to erect their fantasy worlds. Like someone like Mark Zuckerberg is one of the most dangerous people on the planet. Like he's extracting resources to build these headsets to do like a metaverse kind of thing when it literally is, let's all retreat into fantasy. And that's all crypto is, which is why crypto is going to fail. Because it's just fantasy. It's just completely made up bullshit. That's not going to work. That is destined to fail. And like all of course if you're the billionaire class you want crypto to work because you don't want to be tied to these governments, right? Like they've been saying it out loud, the problem is government. Well, now we're seeing how seriously they meant that. That if these truckers were to go into the halls of power and destroy them, the corporate power structure would be like, oh good, thank God. The thing that's possible to tax us and to remove our power has been destroyed. Thank goodness, right? Like, anybody who thinks that these corporate owners like Elon Musk or all these guys are our friends, right, are crazy. Like, deluded. Like, literally cheering for Darth Vader. Like absolutely out to lunch, crazy, go nuts, gaga. Like, might as well be sitting in the corner going, I'm Napoleon. Like, mad. Like, we're dealing with a reefer madness that is just going to destroy the species. All right, I'm going to see if Barry is in. Barry's in. Barry, can you hear me, bud?
Yes, I certainly can. Good evening to you.
Good evening to you. This is Barry Weissletter of Socialist Action. He's the federal secretary joining us today, everybody. Barry, I don't know if
charged.
I don't know if you're in the chat, if you can see the chat or not. But if anybody wants to ask Barry anything as we are talking, you go ahead and I'll read it out. Barry, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good for the middle of winter. You know, winter is half done officially, according to the calendar and the astrologists, and the cosmos is unfolding as it well. It would be a lot better under socialism, but we'll take what we can get. And glad to be with you.
Glad to be with you too, Barry. So we are talking about there's two things that I want to talk to you about today, Barry. Because I mean, we've got to talk about the trucker convoy. Because
absolutely,
it's the news of the day and all of that kind of stuff. But I got you for about an hour and a half here today, Barry. So it's so we can go in.
Oh
pretty
my
deeply.
Goodness!
I know, right?
I don't deserve an hour and a half, but
well,
I'll do my best.
If we run out of road, we can call it short, but I doubt we will. We're both quite robust in our speed. But I want to make sure that we talk about you have been interacting a lot with the NDP recently, and so I want to make sure that we make a lot of room for that. But let's get into the truck. What is your perception of this protest that's going on and the trucker convoy that's happening?
Well, I'm going to ask for your permission to share an article with you.
Anything you want to share with me, bud. Put in the general of this Discord, and I'll gladly show it.
Well, I'm going to read it.
Oh yeah, do that
because it summarizes. Yeah, one of our leading members, Daniel, is a Toronto organizer for Socialist Action. Went to you'll see in the piece I'm going to share with you. He went to a protest against the so-called Freedom Convoy. I think it's a bit of a misnomer to call it a truckers movement, because these are independent operators like the petty bourgeoisie on the road.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm gonna share with you this account because it covers many aspects of the phenomenon and how the working class should respond to it. Because a lot of people have been taken in by the so-called working truckers.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have your go-ahead, I'm just going to dive right into it.
Oh, yeah, for sure, Barry. Just so you know, I actually showed the article that you're about to read. I didn't read it, so please go ahead with it. But I just want you to know that that article is actually spreading around. I myself was showing it on the show just yesterday. So it shows you the power of what Daniel's up to.
Yeah, so we begin with the fact that while the anti-mandate siege in Ottawa continued, Torontonians learned of a similar convoy that was set for the weekend of February the 5th, and that's just the past weekend. We anticipated thousands of people would converge on Toronto to spread what we call a eugenicist message. Saving the lives of the most vulnerable from COVID-19 is not worth any concession of individual liberties. But frustrated and overstressed healthcare workers, they decided to take a stand against this reactionary agenda. On 24 hours' notice, a core of healthcare workers, actively critical of the Doug Ford government's pandemic response, organized a rally. And the spark for this act of community self-defense came actually from Toronto police, who warned healthcare workers not to wear scrubs into work on Friday because anti-mandate protesters had harassed and abused healthcare workers in Ottawa. So on Saturday, that was February the 5th, nurses and doctors decided that they would wear their scrubs and lab coats with pride and stand up for their community and public health. On that cold day, 1,000 people showed up to support and protect healthcare workers. Participating in this effort was Socialist Fight Back and Socialist Action and a few labor activists, including members of the United Steelworkers Union, who unveiled a large purple banner that read, "Shut down hate," and it was greeted with cheers from the crowd. Despite foreknowledge of the anti-social mobilization, Toronto labor leaders had no plan to call upon their many thousands of members to defend public institutions from reactionary mobs. Instead, an entirely grassroots effort rallied resources, including a sound system, much needed to take a stand for community safety. Lacking a strong, coordinated mass labor presence, the route and destination of the progressive forces was entirely dictated by the police. They directed our demonstration down side streets and back alleys onto University Avenue, south of College.
Sorry, Barry. I'm going to cut in just for a second here. Your mic keeps like fading out and in, so I don't know if there's something you're doing on your end, but you're just like fading right out, and then you come back and then you fade out again.
Okay, it might be a piece of paper I'm holding up between the mic and myself. I will avoid doing that, okay? So talking about the absence of a mass labor presence and the fact that the progressive rally was basically chaperoned by the police down side streets and back alleys to University Avenue, south of College. So this escort precluded any contact with the anti-mandate crowd on the south lawn of Queen's Park. It mimicked the advice not to wear scrubs. The government fully admits that the reactionary anti-mandate crowd represents a threat, but it seems incapable of confronting it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to continue. How's the audio now?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Let me know if I slip. Mm-hmm. So organizers of the healthcare workers, nurses, and doctors spoke to a large gathering in front of Toronto General Hospital. They limited their slogans and demands to the denunciation of the anti-mandate reaction. The chants included "Trust Science," "Love Not Hate," and "We Love Nurses." During this brief rally in defense of healthcare workers and public health protections, a much larger anti-mandate assembly clustered at Bloor and Queen's Park Avenue, one of the city's busiest intersections. Roughly 10,000 anti-mandate protesters and dozens of honking and revving cars and trucks occupied that space. And just as at the Defense of Healthcare rally, Canadian flags were on display, but here too were "Don't Tread on Me" and "Fuck Trudeau" flags. Anti-fascist organizers identified some of the leaders of this anti-mandate rally as also being the folks who were involved in the vicious attack on the Hamilton Gay Pride Parade in 2019. Members of white supremacist groups brandishing Nazi and Confederation flags play a visible role in these anti-mandate events. The most common chant among them was "Freedom" and "We Are Not Alone." While similarly large marches led by Palestine Youth Movement in 2021 faced intense police repression, including snipers, dozens of cops on horses, and attempts to confiscate their motor vehicle, this anti-mandate protest enjoyed the tacit support of a largely idle police force. Indeed, only one arrest occurred on February 6th, that of an anti-fascist organizer charged with assault with a weapon, administering a noxious substance, came from a smoke canister, and public mischief for walking into the anti-mandate protests at Queen's Park while dispersing non-toxic blue smoke. I guess blue was a little too close for comfort for the cops. The police also reminded the public to, quote, "to please avoid the demonstration areas." Quote. Much like Ottawa, this warning seemed only to apply to counter-demonstrators. The budget for the Toronto Police is well over $1 billion, the single biggest expense item in the biggest Canadian city. But the police are clearly not the solution. The mandate of the police largely stops with criminalizing the outcomes of poverty and protecting private property. With brutal force, the police organize raids on encampments and land defenders. They harass, abuse, and kill sex workers, disabled people, queer folks, black people, indigenous people, and the poor. So when the Ontario NDP and labor leaders call on the police to protect workers, they cede the responsibility of protecting our communities to class traders who do not live in our communities and who take their orders from the giant propertied masters. I'll come back to this formulation that emanates from the NDP in a little bit. Okay, so how much more evidence do we need that the police are not on the side of the workers? Being embedded in the racist carceral system entirely prevents police from ensuring safety for workers and oppressed people. The violence that the police liberally employ against Black and Indigenous people is not incidental to the police system. It is integral to how the capitalist class divides the lower classes by a racial caste system. Similarly, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, ableism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia are used to counter any prospect of unity of the working class and oppressed people. NDP and union leaders talk about grassroots organizing, but fall short of doing it despite the fact that their organizations encompass millions of members. Grassroots organizing is the necessary response of workers and oppressed people who have been abandoned by the institutions that are supposed to protect them. By limiting themselves to being allies instead of leaders, the NDP and union brass set their sights on an incremental change to the status quo. This is because the NDP brass treat everything as an election ploy, refuse to engage and mobilize its mass membership in direct action. They instead promise to correct Doug Ford's mistakes when they may beat him in the next election. More about that a little bit later, too. John?
Oh, for sure.
The Ontario Federation of Labour, with over 1 million unionized members, maintains an election date counter on its website. On February 6th, it read, 115 days to the June 2nd, 2022 election and a progressive government in Ontario. Close quote. By refusing to mobilize around anything but a ballot exercise, the OFL tops admit that they are happy to wait 4 months, in addition to the years they've squandered already, to do anything while people die amidst the scandal of record corporate profits. Rather than organize mass action now and use that to build support for the upcoming election as a secondary tactic, the OFL and Ontario NDP hold their members and constituents hostage to the, quote, anything but conservative mantra, where they demand for a political program, where any demand for a political program based on fundamental justice rather than small reforms gets poo-pooed as not sufficiently popular to ensure electoral victory. And the truth be damned. That observation may seem a little abstract to folks listening today, but staffers for sitting MPPs in the Ontario NDP Legislative Caucus at Queen's Park privately admit that they steer clear of, for example, the Palestinian struggle against Israeli apartheid. Why? Because that issue might hurt their electoral prospects. I'm not conceding that it would necessarily hurt more than help, but that's their view of it. Back in December, Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada, and former Tory MPP and far-right winger Randy Hillier, who was in the Conservative caucus and was a staunch defender and is a staunch defender of the anti-mandate convoy, they planned a rally on the ex-university campus where a statue of Egerton Ryerson, the racist architect of residential schools, once stood. The Ryerson statue was toppled and beheaded during the summer of 2021 by Indigenous leaders. That so-called freedom rally that they had planned, that the right-wingers had planned to bring on board, intended to oppose any vaccine mandates and to denounce the plan to change the name Ryerson University, which we now lovingly refer to as X. It's not an accident that the struggle against public health protections was amplified by denying the reality of ongoing Indigenous genocide, which includes a disproportionate health impact on Indigenous communities. So students from Fight Back and Socialist Action organized a United Front rally with support from anti-fascist groups, socialists, union locals, and Indigenous leaders. And while Bernier and Hillier canceled their rally amidst an investigation that uncovered a white supremacist plan To attack counter-protesters, the weekly anti-mandate march still attempted to pass through ex-university campus. There they faced a wall of marshals wearing reflective vests and a crowd of 100 chanting supporters behind them. A grassroots community effort forced the anti-mandate protest with its white supremacist partisans to turn sharply down a side street. Who kept us safe? We kept us safe. There was even more community support for the Defense of Healthcare rally held on February 5th, with many of the same organizations in attendance, but it's clear that the anti-mandate protest grew much more than did our side. To the extent that defense of workers from reactionary mobs is ignored by mass labor organizations, anti-mandate protesters are led and supported by petty bourgeois reactionary forces. While the bosses and bankers make record profits, oppressed people, workers, and even the petty bourgeoisie suffer. Of course, the petty bourgeois did not suffer as much as workers and oppressed people, but their class comforts took a hit. We saw the origins of this reactionary turn against any public health protections in small businesses that defied orders to lock down or reduce capacity. With the economic downturn, neoliberal governments abandoned not only workers and oppressed people, but also reduced the relatively high subsidies they provided to the privileged upper crust of small business owners. Some may focus their attention on systemic reasons why the government prioritized supporting billionaires over the poor, or even mere millionaires, but it is evident that a growing body instead reacts against the few public health protections in place and demand an end to any restrictions on business. They insist no lockdowns, no capacity limits, no mandatory masking, no vaccine mandates. Given that we know that the poorest people in the most racialized neighborhoods suffer greater numbers of COVID-19 cases, and since disabled and elderly people are more likely to die of COVID-19, the unrelenting push for an elimination of all public health protections amounts to eugenics. It is social murder. As noted by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and I quote, many groups are particularly vulnerable to negative impacts from COVID-19 precisely because their economic, social, and cultural rights, their rights to equality and Indigenous rights have not been effectively protected or realized in Ontario and Canada over many decades, close quote. Well, we need to affirm the right of all people to life. And that's the piece I wanted to share with you. So
Thank you
thanks
so
for
much
listening.
for sharing that, Barry. We have a question come out of the chat here from Watson. It would seem that the bureaucrats of the AFL, CIO, CLC have no interest in mobilizing their members in mass numbers. Does this not go to the larger class character of these organizations? With 3 question marks, no less.
Well, these organizations remain working class organizations with a pro-capitalist leadership. This is nothing new. I mean, most of the labor organizations on planet Earth have such leadership, more or less collaborating with the corporate elite, or at least parroting the line of the corporate elite on the big issues of the day. This does not mean that these are not working class organizations. This means that these are organizations that are ripe for a challenge to the top leadership and the displacement of those conservative pro-capitalist leaders with rank and file class struggle, progressive, even socialist working class leaders. And that's what Socialist Action is dedicated to facilitating, the replacement of the bureaucrats with class struggle leadership from the bottom up. But this doesn't happen spontaneously. It requires organization. There are entrenched petty interests involved, which will resist sharply any efforts to remove the class traders at the top of the labor organizations. But to write off the organizations is to write off the multi-million membership of those organizations in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, and other countries. And that would be a classic ultra-left error. That would be exactly what the bureaucrats would like us to do: give up, hang our heads, and walk away. And we're definitely not going to do that. I've been involved in class struggle politics in the socialist movement for over 54 years. since I was 16 or earlier, and you know, I've never seen a good reason to walk away from a fight for socialist working class leadership. That is our priority. That's why Socialist Action is involved in working with folks in the NDP, building the Socialist Caucus as the unofficial opposition, the largest uh, 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 formation in the NDP left, and in the mainstream labor movement, um, even unions that are outside the CLC, we are building chapters of WAM. WAM stands for the Workers' Action Movement, and the Workers' Action Movement, which was founded about 10 years ago, Socialist Caucus was founded over 20 years ago, is devoted to winning the unions from the bottom up to oppose class collaboration, to oppose concessions bargaining, to oppose two-tier wages and benefits that make for no job security and inferior benefits and lower wages for the last hired workers. Labor right now has a slight invisible advantage because of the shortage of workers in a number of sectors due to the effects of the pandemic. We have the capacity as workers to fight for improvements, not just to make up what we've lost, to get proper PPE and paid sick leave and other provisions that are necessary in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the other emanations of COVID, but actually to make gains. Gains are tangible and are feasible, and the system, the present situation is pregnant with possibilities for achieving gains. But this requires job action. This requires mass action in the workplace and in the communities. And what's holding that back? Mm-hmm. A layer of comfortable conservative bureaucrats who claim to be the voice of the working class. They're paid to be, the leadership and to advance the interests of the working class, but they feather their own nest. They simply don't want to, quote, risk a struggle in which victory is not guaranteed. Well, victory has never been guaranteed. If that's what workers had demanded for the last 2 centuries, we'd still have children working in the mines. We'd still have the 12-hour day, and we'd still have abominable wages, lack of adequate housing, and certainly no public healthcare system. So struggles have to be waged without a guaranteed victory. On the table. We have to make the best of it, and we have to learn from our mistakes, and we have to mobilize and raise the level of consciousness of working people in all their existing organizations. So we're not going to walk away from the fight against the bureaucrats, and we're not going to discard the existing working class organizations, because you know something, John? Mm-hmm. If these organizations didn't exist, we would have to invent them. We'd have to create them all over again. And unless you have a revolutionary consciousness in the working class, it's likely that in new working class organizations like unions and labor-based political parties, the crap would float to the top. You'd have a conservative leadership once again. So the need is to create revolutionary class consciousness, and that can be fostered by the concentrated activity of revolutionary organizations like Socialist Action, which is building a class struggle left wing in the NDP and in the unions, and not by walking away. We're going to do it by organizing and by living and breathing every struggle, and by winning and drawing the lessons of our victories.
And a worthwhile fight nonetheless. Certainly, I agree with you entirely, Barry, that it's all venues. My position is all struggles are good struggles. That getting in to the labor movement, getting into these sorts of places, absolutely. And boy, do I ever admire your persistence within that struggle, Barry. I got to tell you, I couldn't do it. It looks exhausting to me, honestly. The
You know what's worse?
mm,
What's more exhausting is to stand on the sidelines and see workers suffer setbacks without, raising a fist.
mm.
That's what's exhausting and demoralizing.
So
The engagement in the struggle, even when you're a minority of 10, 20, 30%, is inspiring because it means that we have a structure and we can build on it and we can strengthen it, and catch the next wave. Because when workers rise in struggle and there's no radical structure in place into which to channel that new energy, it dissipates. So it's much worse to just stand on the sidelines and watch, setbacks, rather than to engage in the struggle, knowing that we can learn from, our experiences and get stronger and build for a more resilient fight back in the next round, and eventually change the society root and branch.
so you said something earlier, Barry, that I completely am on in agreement with you, which is that there seems to be, and this trucker protest seems to really indicate this. There seems to be a lack of class consciousness, and your experience, if I'm accurate in saying this, and correct me if I'm not, but your experience seems to indicate that that there is a lack of class consciousness even within the unions themselves. And I'm getting a fellow here in my chat who very, very passionately sort of saying that the unions have essentially become the junior partner in the corporate capitalist profit game and act as an industrial police force against their members. Why is it, and that even within the unions, there seems to be this lack of class consciousness, do you think?
Well, there are multiple reasons and explanations for it. We can go from, the big picture of imperialist super profits conservatizing skilled workers in the first world, on the backs of the exploited labor and resources of the third world. So, Lenin referred to this as the labor aristocracy, those who benefit from imperialist profits derived from exploitation of the, world, its resources and population. A little bit closer to the action that we're now discussing is the fact that there is a conservative bureaucracy atop workers' organizations, and it is oriented not towards socialist transformation, but to class collaboration. That is, mediating the dispute between workers and bosses. We don't need mediators. We need leaders. When you mediate, you're already loading the dice on the side of the boss, because the boss has all the resources: the police, the state, the laws. Most of the laws are weighted heavily on the side of corporations and the state that serves them. Workers have their own organizations, which they had to shed blood and sweat to build. And when out of their own ranks emerges a leadership which is on the side of the bosses, when push comes to shove, if not every moment, at least at the decisive moments. I can give many, many examples of that from my own experience, including the Ontario Days of Action and against the Mike Harris government in the 1990s.
Oh yeah, the Mike Harris government.
Because we had general strikes, but then, the leader of the Canadian Auto Workers pulled the plug and said, "That's it, no more general strikes. We have to defeat this government at the next election," instead of taking it to a higher level and forcing an early election, which it's likely the NDP would have won. Instead, Harris was reelected. But anyway, I got myself a little bit off track there. My point is that the labor leadership, this happens from time to time, so stop me.
No, it's all
The
good.
labor leadership is the internal enemy in the workers' movement, because it is oriented towards the capitalist status quo. Many labor leaders will say, "Oh, I wish we could change the system, but people are not ready for that." Well, why are the workers, why are the people, including the dependents and the relatives of the workers in the organized workers movement, why are they not ready? What sort of uh, elixir have they been fed to get them ready? Well, they've been told that we live in the best of possible worlds, and
Yeah.
Canada's the foremost democracy, even though it overthrows governments in Haiti and Libya, at whim.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Mm.
that there seems to be just no uh, shortage of excuses that the leaders have for the status quo. So what the leaders have done is put the membership to sleep. They've been feeding them, soporific drugs, and they put them to sleep. And when the attendance decreases inside the unions, arguments are furnished for the bureaucrats to say, well, members are not really interested in coming to meetings, so let's have fewer meetings, and we'll jazz up the meetings with entertainment and food. Maybe we'll get more workers out. Well, that usually doesn't work. And to the extent that people come out for the entertainment and the food, they begin to identify the meetings as existing for that purpose. And they have no patience for the political discussions that are needed about the collective agreement and about the legislation that the friends of the corporation implement through the legislature or parliament. And it's a downward spiral. We need to reawaken the working class. There are still deep traditions, great knowledge of self-organization in the workers' organizations. Of course, the socialists tend to organize and crystallize and express most eloquently these ideas, which is why the socialist self-organization of workers is indispensable, because that's the concentrated knowledge of generations of class struggle.
So
But the
Barry,
bureaucrats put the workers to sleep.
but so this touches on something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, right? Because I'm right in lockstep with you in regards to like the leadership and how the leadership has every incentive to continue the capitalist system as it stands, and that the workers, like, it really is getting to a point where like we're heading towards that, like, A Bug's Life moment, where like at the end of the movie A Bug's Life, all of the ants stand up and tell these crickets to get lost, and then then the ants work for themselves, and that's the end of the thing. Exactly. And this is sort of what we seem to be aiming at. But it seems as though we are getting to a point, or how can I frame this without? I'll just step in it. Why not? To what degree can we start to say that the issue that we are facing is not that there is a leadership that is putting people to sleep, but rather that the issue is that the workers themselves are actually compliant, that they're actually in favor of what is occurring. It's not that they're asleep. It's that they have seen both sides of the argument and they've chosen to fight against their fellow workers. Like, at what point do we say that this is actually a bottom-up problem, that it is actually embedded in our culture? And what...
At what point? At what point do we say that? At no point. At no point should we say that, because it hangs on the argument you just made. Workers see both sides of the argument, and they opt for the capitalist continuity of society. Well, at what point did they see both sides? Did they get a clear materialist analysis in school, in church, in the daily newspapers, on the internet, the big screen, the little screen, or any screen? I know there are some opposition voices on the web, but they don't speak the loudest. So, in what sense can we truthfully say workers were given a fair choice between revolution and counter-revolution, between progress and endless regression? Do you think any workers have chosen catastrophic climate change? When was that choice offered? You know, which workers have selected in favor of, wasteful consumerism? Which workers, especially in the United States, shall we say, but in Canada with the fighter jets contract up for now, coming up soon, workers given a choice on a ballot anywhere, in any election, at any level, even for the library board, given a choice between, homes as opposed to bombs. They've never been given these choices. Instead, they're presented with a panoply of smart-ass, sometimes pretty boy politicians who offer everything except the truth about the choices that we face. So to say that workers are inherently, regressive or backward or reactionary assumes that they had a choice instead of being fed a steady diet of hokum.
That it's illusionary choices. We're given illusionary choices, really, I think is what you're driving at. That as long as the conversation is framed within this sort of illusion of choice, then we never have to confront actual choices.
It would be. I mean, I think it's an exaggeration even to say that there's an illusion of choice. It's just a complete cover-up of the real stakes involved. Illusory choices would be better than the choices we're offered now, because there's not even a hint at the choice of anti-imperialism, green reconstruction, reconciliation. Before what should I meant to say restitution before reconciliation in the case of Indigenous people's rights. That's never offered. And in the confrontation with these so-called truckers, these are owner-operators. These are affluent little bosses. They're treated by the cops with kid gloves. When we're Indigenous people who block a railway underpass or an urban busy intersection for more than an hour or two, when were they treated, by cops with kid gloves?
Mm-hmm.
People don't stop to think, because the media covering the arrest of the Wet'suwet'en people by heavily armed RCMP, the media covering that, well, some of the media were arrested, excuse me, it's not their fault. But the media who did cover it, or even covered it from afar, or even covered it by just quoting police sources, don't bother to say, and by the way, here's the other side of the story. They rarely do that. They talk about the threat to supply lines, and they talk about the threat to law and order. They don't talk about the threat to nature, civilization, and the unceded rights of people who've been there for thousands of years to exercise some control over their own ancestral environment. So these choices don't really exist in reality. The stakes, the issues are masked, and our task, it's a bit of a challenge, is to throw a light on this situation, to show what are the historical issues and what are the real choices.
I've been talking a lot recently about how the failing of our media is not information based. It really is a failure as storytellers. What you're touching on really speaks to that we are often given information, and the information is there, but it seems as though the media is not living up to its role as storytellers to give the larger context. Or the history of that information, and that our role in it is really as storytellers, that what we are doing is putting together all of this information in a way that can be presented with sense. Because one of the great strange contradictions that seems to exist in our society is that we love stories about, like, Luke Skywalker fights Darth Vader and the Empire. And yet,
Right, right.
right? Like, we love these stories, and the story keeps happening, and it keeps coming around, and it keeps circulating, and yet, when that story manifests into our reality, or exists in our reality, and we tell this story that is a reflection of it, we seem unable to realize it, and in fact find ourselves actually arguing in favor of the Empire, in favor of Darth Vader, and what do you think is it that is really the barrier between people realizing and understanding as they watch films that are essentially about a rebellious force overthrowing an evil empire, or like Robin Hood robbing from the rich and giving to the poor? Why is it that we can celebrate those stories and yet argue against those stories within our own reality, do you think?
The barrier is class power, and the minority class has the power. They own the media, which is employed chiefly to perpetuate the power and privileges of a tiny minority in society. They control the state, which reinforces that ideology, with organized violence. The barrier is capitalism, and we can pierce the armor of capitalism with concerted mass worker struggles, and through a stronger and clearer, more effective, organized working class socialist. That's why we need to build a revolutionary working class party, in my view, to pierce the armor. If you pierce the armor sufficiently from all sides, the corporate elite and their power centers in the media and other institutions take a step back. They're pushed back, and then they begin to fracture and break up. And the workers' organizations can constitute new structures for deliberation and for the exercise of power by the majority. In Russia in 1905 and again in 1917, these were called workers' councils. The Russian word is Soviet. It means councils of workers, peasants, and soldiers. That was the popular form that it took. In the Paris Commune of 1871, it was, sorry, 1871, that's right. It was assemblies of the proletarian masses in the neighborhoods. An alternative structure to the bourgeois state. The bourgeoisie fled to Versailles, and they colluded with the Prussians to drown the commune in blood after it ruled for 2.5 months in Paris. But you can pierce that armor, and you can come out victorious, which the workers and farmers in Cuba did, because they had an intransigent revolutionary leadership. Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and others in the July 26th movement. They were able to overcome, defeat imperialism, and consolidate workers' power in that country. Fortunately, the Russian Revolution was isolated, and a Stalinist bureaucratic elite took power, liquidated their critics, collaborated with imperialism until it collapsed, eternal decay, and capitalism was restored.
Mm-hmm. So
the working class is going to continue the struggle, and it is going to win as long as we have a world in which the struggle can be waged.
So, Barry, a really interesting question that continuously comes up on my chat, and I have my own position on this, but I'd be very interested to hear yours. To what degree, or how can I say this right? Do you believe that a successful revolution or a successful overthrow of the capitalist system can occur or should occur without some form of armed violence.
Workers have the right to defend themselves. Picket lines are nonviolent, but when scabs and cops try to break the line, workers come together more densely, shoulder to shoulder, and they resist. If a punch is thrown at a picketer has a right to retaliate. We don't seek violence, but we need to prepare for resistance to the violence of the state and the minority. Why? Because we're not blind to the lessons of history. No struggle of any great significance was won without the majority defending themselves against minority violence. So we know that the Cuban Revolution, the Vietnamese Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the one in China and other places required self-organization, including on the military front, not to prepare to counteract the almost certain violence of the property minority is self-defeating. It's self-destructive. So we want a non-violent, peaceful, democratic revolution. But we're sure as hell not going to rely on that scenario as being the one that will prevail when push comes to shove. We have to be prepared to defend ourselves. We don't seek the violence. We want to put an end to it by taking, the toys away from the boys, as the feminist movement is wont to say. We don't want to fund a new generation of fighter jets to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars. In fact, Canada should get the hell out of NATO. NATO should get the hell out of Eastern Europe and stop, all the countries on the western borders of Russia. We don't need a war with Russia. Nobody would benefit from it. And the attempt by imperialism pivot to Asia, by Obama and more visible and to push back China is not in the interests of working people. That Cold War can quickly become a hot war with devastating implications for the future of humanity. I don't defend Xi. I don't defend Putin. I don't like those regimes. They're authoritarian. We need workers, revolution in those countries to establish a socialist democracy. But I'm against all wars between the imperialists and the countries that they target, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela. There's room for improvement in all of those places I just named. But we have to oppose the war makers at home, our own homegrown war makers. In Canada, which is a secondary imperialist power, a junior partner to American imperialism, it means, that Canada can overthrow a democratically elected president in Haiti and instead allow gang warfare to replace democratic elections in that Caribbean country. It's Canada's assignment. To capture the airport and to kidnap Jean-Bertrand Aristide, one of the first democratically elected presidents of Haiti, and to deposit him in the Central African Republic, just because he had the temerity of running and winning an election. And what's replaced him is a horror show. Same thing in Libya, the same thing in many other places where Canada has played its role as dutiful subordinate to the American empire. As a colony of the U.S., it means that our imperialists and the American imperialists have reconciled their interests. They share a common interest. They carry out assignments in proportion to their capacity. It's a different world, and choose to bring it about to the new world by violent means. But we are living in a violent environment, and in order to take the toys away from the boys, we're going to have to do it by some exertion of force.
So let's just quickly switch gears here. I mean, my position on using violence is that fundamentally, I'm very practically minded in this regard. I don't think it works. That even like here given the configuration of our system and our country, I think that if we were to organize and use violence to move forward with a violent revolution, it would destroy the country. It would just separate everybody up. Like Alberta and Manitoba and Saskatchewan would immediately declare their independence and separate from any kind of violent organization, especially communists. But let's quickly switch gears a little bit. I'd like to get your take on specifically Andrea Horwath. Let's get into NDP politics here in Ontario, and how do you think she will be successful? Do you think that the NDP are actually going to mount a successful campaign, or do you think that we're going to see a Del Duca or another Doug Ford victory?
Well, who do you care to consider in terms of the pollsters? Most of the recent polls show that Doug Ford is headed for either a majority or a minority government. He will definitely lose some seats. The NDP holds the second largest block of seats in the legislature, but they are third in most of the polls. Not all, but most of the polls. There was a certain air of unreality about the NDP provincial convention in which I took part.
Yes, that's what I'm very curious to hear from.
Yeah, there were about 1,100 registered delegates, but seldom were there more than eight or 900 on the convention floor. The extent to which cheerleading characterized the convention was really pretty disturbing. It was as if it was operating in a bubble, impervious to all the evidence outside of it that the NDP is in trouble. Del Duca doesn't have much to offer, and with a caucus of 7, the legislature seems unlikely that he would be in a position to catapult to victory. But the NDP platform leaves a lot to be desired, and yet most of the delegates didn't want to hear about this. And there was like a reluctance to debate weaknesses of the NDP platform and the weaknesses of its rather non-charismatic leader. I mean, to put it mildly.
I've been calling her a substitute kindergarten teacher on the chat, so you don't need to put it too mildly.
I think that's unfair to substitute teachers.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
I unionized substitute teachers at the Toronto District School Board like 30 years ago. I think there's a lot more talent in our substitute teacher pool. But anyway, this is not a personal thing. I don't want to focus on the strengths or weaknesses of a particular leader, especially one who's, I think, ostensibly on her way out. But the idea that there's so little scope for critical thinking. NDP convention was disturbing.
Well, that's a really interesting.
People who showed up, what they wanted. People who showed up, that's what they wanted. And fortunately, there's an organized left in the NDP, the Socialist Caucus, which circulated 30 resolutions, none of which came to the floor for debate because the party bureaucracy prevented that from occurring. They were ranked low in every subject category, so there was never enough time to get to debate more than 2 or 3 resolutions, and there would be 50 or 60 or 70 in each category. And guess where the Socialist Caucus resolutions were? They were at the very bottom. But that didn't stop, a dozen or more Socialist Caucus spokespersons from going to the con mic and saying this resolution before us doesn't go far enough. Instead, there's a better one that we won't get to debate, but we should have debated, and here's where the party should go. And I can give you examples like build social housing, disarm the police, nationalize General Motors, new protocols to manage the pandemic. Convention should set election platform priorities for the NDP, and not just the leader decide. For democracy in the candidate nomination process, there are how many electoral districts in Ontario? 127, 131. I don't know the exact number. Probably in 35 to 45% of the cases, the NDP candidate will simply be selected by party headquarters. There'll be no meeting and no candidate nomination election. Now, it's true that some districts are really weak and they can hardly pull together enough people to constitute a meeting, but that's not the case in most places. What is the case is a leadership that wants socialist candidates, and so they take 6 or 7 months to vet the names of people who come forward offering to run, seeking the nomination. They exclude anyone who shows any sign of radicalism, even though it's within the framework of the socialist movement. He's talking about arming the farmers and heading to the Halton Hills and constituting a workers' rebellion state there. No one advocates terrorism or minority violence. We're talking about advocating socialist policies. And unfortunately, there was very little of that on the floor of the convention. But still, thank goodness there's a socialist caucus, because we were able to win some battles inadvertently. For example, there was a resolution on exorbitant auto insurance rates. That if you live in Brampton, you pay twice as much to insure your car than if you in downtown Toronto. So the Socialist Caucus at the CONMIC moved a referral to say, not only do we want to reduce the rates, we want public auto insurance. We want to nationalize the insurance companies and provide public auto insurance, which exists in Manitoba and in British Columbia and perhaps other provinces. The brass wasn't expecting that. We made the argument powerfully. We won the vote by 54%. That's, not, the most important issue at a time when the world is facing eco-catastrophe, but it's an issue that showed the left could win.
Well,
and also, the bureaucrats let down their guard.
Also, Barry, I feel like this auto insurance one that you're talking about, it's always been odd to me that the Ontario NDP weren't pushing harder on this, because it's such a winning issue to the type of voters that would typically not think about voting NDP. I think that if you're a person who's driving around and you've got auto insurance and all this, you're not a poor person, right? You're perhaps of the working class and an upper kind of working class thing, and this kind of speaks to me about Mike, and you're confirming a lot of my deep concerns about what's going on in the NDP, that they don't seem willing or capable of rising to the occasion, and it's very shocking to me, because you would think, given the journey that Andrea Horwath has taken as leader of the NDP, she's been leader of the NDP now, 16 years, maybe even a bit longer than that, and it seems to me like this, she has to know that this is her moment, that if she can't seize power now, that there is no circumstance in which she will. And instead of coming forth with bold policy decisions and making big statements of solidarity in order to galvanize workers or to galvanize the populace, she really seems to be quite limp and incapable of rising to the occasion. What do you think is causing this? Because it just seems, even if I believe that Andrea Horwath is motivated by the most selfish possible thing, which is her own prestige or any of this, it just seems like it's bad politics. It just seems like it's bad play.
Well, the cause of it is politics. It's the lack of political imagination and a commitment to preserving the capitalist status quo and not trying to awake the sleeping giant known as the working class.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Tom Mulcair?
Yes.
He was the federal NDP leader. Took over from Jack Layton when he passed away. The NDP was the official opposition. It was poised to become government. Trudeau was in third place, a distant third in terms of seats in Parliament. And what was Tom Mulcair's campaign against the right wing Conservatives? His campaign was a balanced budget.
Yeah.
And a balanced budget means austerity.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to raise taxes on the super rich and the corporations, the banks, the concentrations of wealth in capitalist society and the Canadian state. Unless you're going to do that, then a balanced budget means, austerity. It means cutbacks. It means loss of services and loss of jobs for working people. So what did Trudeau do? Remember, he campaigned to the left of Tom Mulcair.
Yeah, that's right.
He said we're going to have to borrow on the future to deal with growing inequality and lack of childcare and housing and environmental protection. We're going to have to spend and recoup it later through increased production and a happier population, working population. It was a very cynical move because the Liberals had no intention of doing that.
Yeah, of course.
They haven't expropriated the wealth of the ruling class in order to create a better life for most Canadians.
So I've got an interesting commentary. I've got an interesting commentary going on here by one of my regulars, Eric. Good to see you, by the way, Eric. I didn't have the chance to say hello. I always hated the notion that certain people turn traitor or whatever. What I strongly believe is that human nature by nature is good. That people that exist in our structural society creates the problem that we see. This means that even a capitalist who is making billions of dollars are still trying to be good people, who are trying to pursue their own self-interest. The problem is that societies construct the society in such a way that only certain people are interested in being represented, while a vast majority of people are being oppressed. This is also one problem that I have with the communists and why I'm an anarchist. The very fundamental problem that I have with communist country is how authoritarian these countries are and lack of liberties that exist within these countries. I've been holding my tongue for a while now that I think for this context, it's an important thing to discuss. Here is something I've been arguing for a while. I need to explain two very important concepts: negative liberties and positive liberties. Negative liberties are the kind of freedom that faux libertarians always talk about, and the liberty of the individual to do whatever they want without restriction. I think Eric's going to have more to say as this goes on. Does that spark anything that you'd like to talk about?
Well, yeah, we're dealing with some misnomers here. Communist countries, like which countries are communist or ever were communist? That's a misconception founded on a misunderstanding of the fact that there can be no socialism, let alone communism, in one country. It requires a planetary change. It requires global socialist revolution. Any socialist revolution that occurs, especially if it does in a poor country like Russia or Cuba, is going to be challenged just to defend itself, much less to build a classless society. So until we effect the leap from necessity.
Sorry, Barry, I lost you.
In his booklet, Socialism, Scientific and Utopian, until we make the leap from necessity to freedom, which necessitates a transformation of the mode of production on a global basis, there is no possibility of a socialist country or a communist country. What you have is transitional societies that are trying to move from the capitalist mode of production to socialist equality. No country is completely self-sufficient, so that requires a combination, a division of labor and resources on a global scale to eradicate poverty in the poorest countries and to enjoy the benefits of industrialization in harmony with nature across the board. So the idea that communist countries are authoritarian is a profound misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
That these are not communist countries; these are transitional societies which more or less successfully struggled against the siege of the hostile imperialist countries that sent armies and economic embargoes against these pioneers of human liberation, driving them back, sometimes fostering within them bureaucratic elites, just like inside our unions. You form a union and you hope for the best, but unless there's a continuing mobilization of the working class and drawing in more and more ranks and raising the level of understanding, unions will relapse and a bureaucratic conservative elite will come to the top of the organization until the next wave of worker struggles. So this is not inherent in human genetics. This is the relationship of forces in a union, in a country, between countries, on a global scale. What's needed is a revolutionary working class international, which is based on a program and a revolutionary strategy, which the anarchists cannot, do not, and are unable to provide. Their notion of individualism, let the street decide, famous slogans of the anarchists in the Spanish Revolution, anarchists to join the liberal Popular Front Stalinist coalition government in Spain that disarmed the workers. To disarm the workers in Spain between 1936 and 1939.
Sorry, Barry, that fade out and fade in is happening again.
Paving the way for a fascist victory in Spain. So there are no communist countries, and unless we get rid of that misconception, we can't make much headway in terms of understanding the dynamics of revolution and transitional societies which struggle to take down the imperialist rulers that dominate the world.
Absolutely, and I tend to agree that and this is Watson. You're quite on the mark here to point out that what we're discussing is socialist internationalism, which Trotskyism, and I know that you're a Trotskyist, Barry, as opposed to socialism in one country, Stalinism. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, after the death of Stalin, the communist project wasn't able to be sustained. And I think that this is actually a good time, Barry, for us to sort of discuss, because it comes into my chat all of the time. I am a person who is completely willing to organize with all isms of all type, that what matters to me are the people who show up. And do you think that leftists have a kind of reputation for dividing themselves and being their own worst enemies? Do you believe that there is a resurgence or a rising desire for these disparate groups who have traditionally been somewhat antagonistic to one another? Do you see a desire to kind of, like, do you think the Trotskyists and the anarchists and even the Stalinists and the Marxist-Leninists and all this can put aside their differences with one another in order to form a larger organization in order to challenge capital? Do you think that is on the horizon?
Socialist action is devoted to this proposition that you just presented.
Excellent. Yeah.
That the left should unite. We are the strongest proponents by far of the idea of the United Front. This is not a new idea. This was an idea that sprang out of the Communist International in the 1920s. The idea that different political tendencies of the workers' movement can come together and maybe march separately but strike together in order to accomplish limited and specific aims. Examples of this. In the article that I read at the top of the show, demonstration to stop the anti-vaxxers at X University. was the coming together of two tendencies, or actually several tendencies on the university campus who wanted to stop Bernier and Hillier and the anti-vaxxers, and successfully defended the campus common from the intrusion of the far right. Right now, Socialist Action is building a municipal political action common front. It's called MSA, the Municipal Socialist Alliance. And in it, in addition to Socialist Action, are ODSP campaigners for higher rates against poverty, Toronto Housing Coalition, activists among Indigenous and encampment offenders, and a number of individuals. We put out a challenge to other groups to participate, and one group came to our most recent meeting, Democratic Socialists of Canada.
Amazing.
Hope that they'll join the campaign. We don't prophesy that we're going to take over City Hall, mm-hmm. But we do want to present, 6, a dozen, maybe more candidates for City Council, School Board in Toronto and Peel. We have a similar project underway in Vancouver, Socialist Action and Democratic Socialists of Vancouver and others. Why are we trying to do this? Small groups trying to cluster together in order to wage an educational campaign. Well, because we want to demonstrate that it is possible for the left to unite. Mm-hmm. But there are some organizations that will resist this tooth and nail and will want to continue to function exclusively in their own silo, with their own front organizations, and without offering any meaningful degree of solidarity to others. And that's sad. So if you were to ask me, John, which organizations demonstrate that they're interested in working together, I say don't rely on what I'm going to tell you. Go to a demonstration of ODSP fighters for higher rates. Go to an anti-poverty demonstration. Go to an Indigenous rights demonstration. Go to a Palestinian solidarity action. Go to a picket line and see who's there. Mm-hmm. Which flags, which banners. I know that you'll see ours, but don't take my word for it. Go and check it out for yourself. The banners and flags that you see are the organizations that are most likely willing to work with one another. And we put a lot of emphasis on that. We are strong partisans of the United Front. And why? 2 reasons. 1, we think that's the way to win on specific issues, when we can unite on something without having to agree on everything. Mm-hmm. The other reason is closely related. We think that through united action, we can have a dialogue between the different participating organizations and individuals and enable each of them to show how their policy and modus operandi is best. Like the test of practice. Praxis, theory and practice come together. So we think that helps us to build the Revolutionary Party, to show that we know how we can win on specific issues, and we know that it's better to have a democratic workers' movement where different organizations can be heard through their spokespersons at common actions, and not where one group calls an action and excludes everybody else from the speaker's platform. Right? Absolutely. So democracy has its value, and it can be demonstrated through the United Front. That's why we do it.
Absolutely. And my position on all of this has always been like, and you hit on it exactly, which is why I was initially drawn to Socialist Action in the first place, is who's showing up? Who's showing up? Like, it's one thing to talk a big game and to have a big kind of series of statements, but who's actually coming out and putting their skin in the game? And for sure, your point about Socialist Action showing up is I mean, for goodness sakes, like I watched a video recently of the Communist Party of Canada, and sort of it was about their history and all this, and they were showing clips from modern protests in the modern era, and socialist action was all over the place. You guys were all over their videos, like to the point where I don't think they could extract you if they wanted. And I just to read out a couple of the comments I have here in the
falsification of history.
Oh, sorry, Barry.
Oh, I was just going to make a sardonic point about the falsification of history. How Stalin airbrushed a lot of photographs to remove Trotsky from, the collective photos of the leadership. You'd have Lenin and Stalin.
That's just some petty bullshit.
And Preobrazhensky, but no Trotsky, because even though he was there, he was airbrushed out of the photo.
Like, this is my big thing about the Stalin-Trotsky thing, is that, boy howdy, man. Like, the pettiness is unbelievable. Like, it's just... Anyway. We got a comment here from Watson, right? Maybe not the Stalinists, but Trotsky proposed united frontism in the face of Nazi aggression in Germany, as opposed to Stalin's failed popular frontism. Kanja, I wish you hadn't deleted that message. I was looking forward to sharing that. Rob, and I'd really like you to talk on this, because we're getting into the waning minutes of our conversation. Patreon's Alex Badilla and Kiri Vedivelu, I apologize for that pronunciation, are running for Toronto City Council as part of the Socialist Action Municipal Campaign. Isabella Gamp will be running for mayor. Barry, please update us.
With pleasure, John. I mentioned the MSA, didn't I? The Municipal Socialist Alliance is the name under which the campaign will be waged, and we're fighting for nationalize the big landlords, for seizing vacant vacant suites, vacant accommodations. No one should die of the cold on the sidewalks in the winter in Toronto or anytime anywhere. We want a green energy transition. We want free public transportation. Let's get rid of those stupid library book fines. Using the libraries more and put a lot of the librarians back to work. A lot of them lost their positions or their regular employment during the pandemic. A lot of changes that we want to make, and it's under the ambit of the Municipal Socialist Alliance, which just adopted the name a few weeks ago. We issued the call really last summer, more than a year and a quarter before the municipal election, which is I think next October. We said let's get together and discuss a platform, and then we presented a platform, some ideas. It's still a work in progress. It hasn't been decided in finality. We augment the platform, the issues at every meeting. I'm glad you asked me that question. The next meeting of the MSA, Movement for Socialist Alliance, Municipal Socialist Alliance, is on Sunday, February the 27th at 6 p.m. And there'll be a link for that Zoom meeting. Anyone who's interested in Municipal Socialist Alliance and being part of it, whether you want to design something, write a speech, become a candidate, support a campaign. It's true that Kiri and Alex are two of our candidates, and we've got Adam Golding, who's with the Toronto Housing Coalition. I think he's gonna run for council and maybe for mayor. A lot of the positions have not yet been determined in terms of the text or in terms of the candidates, but it's open to everyone to join if you want an anti-capitalist campaign, if you want a socialist alternative to big business rule at City Hall and at the school board level. Then you should join us, and you'd be most welcome. We're gonna challenge the ruling class and the big media. We're gonna say some questions never get asked, and some questions just never get answered. We're gonna try to fill the gap. We don't have any unrealistic expectations about a transfer of power to the proletarian majority in the city, but we're going to try to expose the bankrupt arguments of the status quo and the powerful in the city, the developers, the construction industry, self-serving. We're going to offer an alternative and recruit a lot of people, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of people to a socialist alternative. And we're going to do it in more than one city. I talked about Vancouver as being another place where we're trying to bring this about. And there are progressives who are, working together in Montreal, in Ottawa, in New Brunswick, and we're reaching out to them too, to build local coalitions which are democratic and put socialism on the ballot.
We've got a question coming out of the chat. Out of curiosity, is Socialist Action, it is an across Canada organization, is there a branch in Prince Edward Island?
Good question. We had a couple of members in Prince Edward Island up to last summer. They were students at UPEI, but we don't have a branch there. And we would like to constitute a branch in PEI. We have a pretty strong branch in New Brunswick. We have some members in Newfoundland, Labrador. We have a couple of members in Nova Scotia. We need to do a lot more. And the person who's asking the question, are they applying to join?
Where would they go to apply to join, Barry?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. You can go to our website and just click on join. And the website is www.socialistaction.ca. Socialistaction.ca. I would type it out, but I don't know where to put that. So
I've got it right here, Barry, for you.
You got it. Okay, cool. So socialistaction.ca, you can apply to join. Today, a 17-year-old student in Woodstock, Ontario joined. Every day people are joining. And everyone's welcome as long as, there's agreement on a basic socialist program and on the need to act together. Democracy and debate, unity and action. That's what we mean by democratic centralism. Democracy and debate, and whatever's adopted, let's do it together. Let's carry it out, because that's really the only way to test a policy. In the NDP and in many unions, they have these classical debates, big earth-shaking debates. They take a vote, and then the next day the leaders say, well, that's interesting, but can't really implement that policy because it's out of step with public opinion.
Yeah.
And then they discard it. Well, we don't. We actually carry out the policies that we adopt.
Well, you actually do what you say you're going to do, Barry? Sounds authoritarian
I know, it's
to
crazy.
me.
Yeah, it's very authoritarian. Keeping your promises.
I know, right?
Even though some people tell you not to do so.
I know.
To your guns.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very rigid, but it is democratic, and it's the only way to test in practice a political theory.
So I'm going to read out a couple of these final comments here, Barry, and then I'm going to give you the floor to finish up. Say anything you'd like to say to the people out in the world. Rob is saying, Isabella's story is so inspiring. She had to collect ODSP because she was so mentally and physically impaired that she couldn't work. Now she's running for full-time mayor. WTG-SA, way to go, Socialist Action. And then from Seraphim, honestly, we need to put those old grievances down. They cloud our decisions and leave a gaping wound in the worker revolution. I agree with you, Seraphim. So, Barry, as we're in the waning minutes here, is there anything you'd like to wrap up with? Your final thought.
Solidarity forever. The union will make us strong, but we need to put the movement back into the labor movement. That's going to require a change of leadership. That's going to require self-organization from the bottom up. The Socialist Action in particular is dedicated to that proposition, that we need to organize transitional caucuses in the main working class organizations. Not to focus on the grievances that exist on the left, but not to ignore them as either. We will test our political differences in practice, not through endless backbiting and negativity, but through going forward in a positive way to unite the workers against the bosses for agenda. Let's provide a positive alternative, and those organizations that refuse to participate, that decline to unite, that are not imbued with the spirit of solidarity, that will become evident, and workers who are interested in change will take note, and they will gravitate towards the ones who want to work together and build unity and win. Every small victory paves the way to greater victories down the road. We have our eyes on the prize, and that's transforming society. But we know that that's done by, increasing the capacity of the working class to fight and to win, by inspiring it, and by bringing together the most advanced workers in a revolutionary, democratic, socialist working class organization. That's what we're all about. And people who are fed up with climate change and authoritarianism and growing inequality and the pandemic and lily-livered labor politicians, join us. Join us, and together we'll change the world. We will change the world together for the better.
Wonderful sentiment.
It's a pleasure to be with you on this program.
Absolutely.
I hope people get in touch. I'm at 647-986-1917. Yeah, that's deliberate, 1917. 647-986-1917 and socialistaction.ca. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you, Barry. Terrific. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, bud. Please contact me anytime, and I'll get you on the show. We won't wait a couple of months to get you back, okay?
Deal.
All right, bud. Have a good one.
Take care.
So that's Barry Weissletter. I love talking to Barry, man. He's so well read. He's so intelligent. And it doesn't. I find myself in a position with Barry when and we're bringing up grievances and things like this on the left, and I just find that when I talk to Barry, it's those petty differences seem to dissipate. And he's so well read and so informed and so entrenched and fighting the good fight. And Eric, my suggestion to you is just contact them. Barry's going to talk to you the way he talks to me, right? And he's interested in finding new people. And if you want to know what kind of support Socialist Action can provide for you, there's the email right there. Boom. socialistactioncanada@gmail.com. And he'll be over the moon to hear what he can offer to you and and how you can help each other. Oh, so it's so nice to talk to someone like Barry, honestly. I was feeling really grumpy today, and it's really nice to be able to sit down and have a good conversation. I want to just very quickly, I got to go use the bathroom, so I'm just very quickly going to put on some Richard Wolff and Cornel West. Be right back.
Communism, socialism is about control. In this country, we're given the idea that communism, socialism is about control, capitalism is about freedom. And freedom resonated with centuries of people in this country, at least, too.
Well, I think, freedom, like everything else, like beauty and so on, lies a little bit in the eye of the beholder. Freedom to do what? Marx was very clever. I said, yes, you can free a person from slavery, but what freedom is that if the next thing they are is enslaved to another system that treats them very similarly? Marx loved to use the phrase wage slave because he wanted to teach working people that when you move from slave or peasant status and you're now a wage earner, that may turn out to be another kind of slavery, leading you to have to recognize that the further break has to be made, and then Marx tells us how and why that's the case.
But that's a tricky sell in the U.S., or at least it must have been in Marx's time, Cornell, because freedom from slavery was a big plus, and to be a wage slave rather than someone getting paid nothing at all was certainly a positive.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. I think Marx was also preoccupied with what's missing in the slogans of the French Revolution, which is democracy. So Marx is part of a radical democratic tradition that says that the voices of those in institutions must shape the direction of those institutions. So wage slavery is another form of undemocratic governance to the degree to which workers' voices, and of course Brother Wolf talks about this with unbelievable eloquence and insight in his recent works, that the voices of workers are not heard. And so America talks about its love of democracy, but when it comes to the workplace, our workplace looks very crypto-feudalistic in terms of those at the top dictating and shaping the destiny of those units. But I mean, Brother Wolf lays this out.
You want to comment on that?
Sure. I mean, Cornell says it very nicely and summarizes it. When you go to work in the morning in a capitalist system, you're walking into a place where what you do, how you do it, what's done with the fruits of your brain and your muscle are all handled by a tiny group of people over whom you exercise no power at all. They can fire you and do when they think it's in their interest to do so. This is the opposite of democracy. In a democratic workplace, you would say every person, every man and woman who is part of this participates in making the decisions, since they all have to live with the results. That's the democratic idea. And the modern capitalist enterprise is the negation of democracy. That's why it's always been so bizarre to imagine a system so fundamentally undemocratic in its workplaces should present itself as the agent or the bringer of democracy around the world.
Laying it out. That's why I wanted to share it. That's like laid out pretty clearly. And Mock, you're right, man. We didn't do the number draw. Let's just do it. Mock's in with a 7. You got the 7 yesterday, bud. I don't know if you were here for it, though.
Here we go for today's number.
Here we go.
It's February 9,
Who's still here?
2022.
Who's still in the chat?
10 balls.
Let's have a look. I'm going with my Big
Ball
10.
has a number.
Big 10. Ezreal, good to see you,
Numbers
Ezreal.
1 through
Harry.
10.
Eric, of course, coming with 5. Good
Swirl
spread. You got a good spread.
the numbers.
Swirl the numbers. Now, why does he wear this hat? Like, it's
Pick
so...
a number.
I love it.
Today's number is 7.
Bing, bong, boom. Mocked. Twice in a row, bud. Good for you, man. Look at you. You've got the energy. These last couple of days, you've gotten the energy. Hopefully good things are happening to you, bud. Absolutely wonderful. Did anyone see that video of Putin saying that if Ukraine became part of NATO and tried to retake Crimea, that all of Europe would be pulled into a war? I mean, yeah. Like, I haven't seen that video, but I mean, that's been Putin's position, right? That's what Putin said. Rigged. What? It's not what? I'm not. What? I'm not. How could I possibly? If it was rigged, it would certainly be in my favor, wouldn't it? I could just like watch the video, find the number, and then guess the number every time, right? That's how I would rig it. But you can tell that I'm honest because I'm not winning these things. And that is how it worked. I finally thought of a way to pose my question. Yeah, that's always the way it goes, Eric. That's always the way it goes. The moment it's over. And honestly, Eric, I knew it was going to happen that way. It's always how it works. Once it's over, that's when it comes together. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no. And Putin's position is very clear. Like, I mean, he views... fake bingo. He very simply views that... and I mean, it makes sense. NATO was built to fight against the Soviet Union, right? NATO was built to fight against Russia. Like, that's the reason it exists. And absolutely, Seraphim, that's exactly right on the money, right? Email, when you email Eric, when you email Barry, email him your question. He'll absolutely respond to you. And, no, Barry, I love having Barry on because he's a good man. And that really counts for a lot. You know, you can tell when you're having a good conversation with a good man. I wish I had the energy and the wherewithal to be able to get more guests on the show. I always enjoy these having the guests on, and in a kind of a way, honestly, it's a bit of a break for me. I get to just listen. I don't have to. I don't talk. They talk. So it is kind of. this, that, and the other thing, so on and so forth. But yeah, Putin Ukraine should remain an independent state. Like, it really should. That NATO shouldn't own it, neither should Russia. And given the history, given the context, like, yeah, there's no reason. Like, there's no reason to continue this. Like, just everybody put their guns down, and everything will be completely fine. All right, we got half hour left on the show. Why the left shouldn't underestimate Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre is a sharp speaker who has considerable social media presence and is idolized by conservatives across the country. Erin O'Toole is out as conservative leader after a disappointing 2021 election result in which the Conservatives failed to pick up any new seats, and a muddled response to the trucker protest in Ottawa that galvanized much of his party. O'Toole was defeated on February 2nd in a 73-45 vote of the Conservative Parliamentary Caucus. O'Toole has a bit of a soft touch approach to politicking. Unlike Andrew Scheer, he made an express effort to court voters from other parties on left-of-center issues. He made largely meaningless entreaties to lower-income voters, for instance, introducing a set of pleasant-sounding but essentially useless labor reforms. He tried to moderate the party's position on climate, notably introducing a carbon tax policy. O'Toole also locked party votes on LGBTQ issues, notably whipping a vote in favor of a ban on conversion therapy. Amusingly, this seems to have been a key reason for his ouster. In short, he was a red Tory, a conservative politician who leaned ever so slightly to the left of his party. His commitments didn't amount to much, but they did earn plaudits from some credulous media figures and put him at odds with more reactionary elements of his parliamentary coalition. Blue Tory figures who are likely to take the reins now that O'Toole has been vanquished. And the leading Blue Tory? That would be Pierre Poilievre, an MP who represents the Ottawa area riding of Carleton. Poilievre is a compelling, sharp speaker who has a considerable social media presence and is idolized by conservatives across the country, particularly among the younger set. He is a relentless questioner in Parliament who sometimes gets the better of Justin Trudeau. Perhaps most importantly, Poilievre gets a lot of play in the media, and has been floated as the leadership favorite in multiple publications. Assuming Poilievre is not derailed by personal concerns, he could very well be the conservative leader by the summer or fall. Frankly, this should be terrifying to the Canadian left. Poilievre is a true blue conservative hardliner who is constantly pushing right-wing talking points. Other conservative MPs typically maintain an arm's-length relationship with reactionary think tanks and advocacy organizations. Not so with Poilievre. He frequently tweets stories from the Fraser Institute, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, and other right-wing groups. He also peddles right-wing talking points in Parliament. His latest push is to characterize recent stimulus spending as printed money, demanding spending cuts as a solution to inflationary concerns. Fitting with his youthful appearance, Poilievre is essentially an unreconstructed conservative activist, someone who idolizes Margaret Thatcher and Jordan Peterson. He's not a compassionate conservative like O'Toole, or a sort of tepid populist like Doug Ford. Poilievre is a reactionary austerity monger in the mold of a Jason Kenney, someone who will fight unions, suffocate the public sector, and cut welfare, even if those policies prove highly unpopular. Poilievre's writing suggests as much. He once took to the pages of the Financial Post to advocate for right-to-work legislation, laws that would strip unions of most of their funding by making union dues voluntary, and floated the idea of introducing a right-to-work bill to his constituents. In the same publication, Poilievre called the Canadian welfare state horrific and spoke favorably of eliminating all welfare policies, replacing them with a tiny survival stipend for all low-income people. Poilievre has been the conservative point man, attacking CERB and other pandemic-related government assistance, writing that the government should put down the credit card, in December of 2020, during the most deadly period of the coronavirus pandemic. In Parliament, Poilievre is equally Austerian. He took point on pushing Bill C-377, an attempt to hamstring unions by forcing them to disclose reams of information for anti-union activists to exploit. Poilievre made over 100 parliamentary speeches supporting C-377, as well as C-525, and similar anti-union efforts. In recent years, he has been laser-focused on critiquing the Liberal government's unambitious fiscal policies from the right. We need a bold and militant left that will expose Poilievre for what he is, a right-wing fanatic who takes his cues from Milton Friedman and the Fraser Institute. A Pierre Poilievre-led conservative government is a terrifying prospect indeed. This piece is from Oliver Mackenzie. He's a Victorian-based video producer and writer who works for a variety of government, nonprofit, and media clients. Guess whose dad is gay? Hashtag Pierre Poilievre. Well, and there's nothing wrong with that. Good to see you, Tom. But I mean, given the danger, in my view, of Pierre Poilievre, and I've said it several times, but I'm going to say it a lot, I suppose. He's a very effective liar. He's a very effective liar. He really does know how to lie to people, and he understands. That his positions are only popular in the small ownership cabal that he works for. And so he knows how to acknowledge the reality of the lived experience of Canadians while leading them down the garden path to a solution that betrays them. He knows how to do it. He's very effective at it. And I think, given the history of Canadians and Canadian politics, he'll be very effective simply because Canadians respect a very persuasive liar. Yep, Skippy will do very well with the urbanite wine mom areas of the 905. Yep, he will. That's what makes him so dangerous, right? That those wine moms who will complain that their own children are not doing very well will vote in favor of a person who will destroy any prospects they have for a livable future, right? Like that, and that's the goal of the Conservative Party at this stage in the game, is to dismantle the society further, to make it impossible for anyone to actually be able to get housing, a job that actually gives a shit about them, right? Yeah, he's been a Harper acolyte since the Preston Manning days, of course, right? And he is a career conservative Harperite, right? And he's just the logical conclusion of this ideology, right? This ideology that is, by its very nature, overtly destructive. Right? That the goal of the ideology is to gut the society and sell it to a small cabal of owners. That's the goal. Completely stated and openly, right? And so what we are seeing now is a form of the capitalist death cult. And that form is well-refined, curated, polished, well-spoken, right? And completely treacherous. Like, Pierre Poilievre will betray literally everyone. That's his MO. And ironically, but simultaneously, I actually think Pierre Poilievre would probably be a better prime minister than Justin Trudeau. Like, if you want to get caught in the absurdist conversation that is conservative versus liberal, like, which they both work for capital, they're both enthralled by capital, so it really is just which face do you prefer. But if I am to compare the history of recent federal politics, so it's Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau. Those are the two leaders. Well, which of those two prime ministers were good? Or not good, but which of those two prime ministers were better? Well, Stephen Harper was better. Stephen Harper was a better prime minister than Justin Trudeau by a lot. I don't think it's close. Like, I don't think it's close at all. I think Justin Trudeau has really proven that he is not only an incapable leader, but that he is actively working. Like, a lot of why the Conservatives are so dangerous is because of their lack of empathy, their inability to care about other people's suffering. And so they'll just walk by suffering, right? Whereas the Trudeau administration has actively increased it and been extremely duplicitous while doing it, right? And this is, I think, a misnomer, Tom. Like, I understand where you're coming from, that status quo Trudeau. Trudeau has been extremely devastating to the climate movement. He's been extraordinarily devastating to the Truth and Reconciliation movement. That Trudeau is not status quo. In my view, Trudeau is wickedly destructive, right? He's been actively lying to the populace about caring about Indigenous rights and caring about climate change while doing everything he can to make the problem worse. He isn't status quo. He's a destructive force. That Harper was actually was a more status quo politician. Like, and I use the example of the relationship between the Prime Minister's office and the fossil fuel industry. That Harper explicitly said he didn't care about climate change. That was an issue. That's an issue for my grandchildren to fight for, right? Like, that's what he said. So he was just honest about he didn't care about climate change. It wasn't on the table for him. He wasn't going to put forward regulation or anything like that. But when it came to actually interacting with the fossil fuel industry, anytime the fossil fuel industry came to him and said, "Can we have a bailout, please? Can we get government money, please?" He was just like, no, right? Because he actually believed in his free market ideology, right? He wasn't lying about it. He actually did think that this is the way to do things. And so the fossil fuel industry didn't really like him because he wasn't giving them the free money that they were asking for, right? So conversely, the Trudeau government has given billions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry, right? Has bailed them out constantly, is literally fighting a war on their behalf, while simultaneously like buying pipelines and shit, right? Like, Justin Trudeau is far more destructive and far more bought in to the death cult than Harper was, right? And Harper was passing legislation like the childcare benefit, right? Have we gotten literally anything like that from Trudeau? I mean, Trudeau enacted the CERB and then removed it. Like, so if Harper passed the childcare benefit and then removed it, he'd be on the same level, right? So that's what makes Pierre Poilievre more dangerous, I think, because if you're caught in that conservative liberal dynamic, well, there is a rational route to believe that Pierre Poilievre would be a better prime minister. And given how enormously the enormous failure that is Justin Trudeau, and he is an enormous failure as a prime minister. Like, his father would be ashamed of him. Like, his tenure of prime minister has been like a black mark on the history of liberal politics, without a doubt. I mean, the blackface scandal, the ridiculous lies that he tells about climate change, like literally walking out of like COP26 being like, we're gonna get to net zero by 2050, literally saying that while simultaneously increasing oil production by 30%. Like, the man is an incredible liar, like an incredible liar. Like, say what you like about Stephen Harper, he never told a lie that big. Never. Like, Harper believed what he said. You can disagree with him, and you should, right? You should disagree with a lot of what Harper says, but he believes it, right? And he's honest about his position and why he believes that way, right? He's not trying to lie to you. He's just egregiously wrong, right? Whereas Justin Trudeau is a liar, like a fundamental two-faced, greasy liar. Like, he know, and he has to know that he's lying. Like, he has to know. The only way he would understand that he isn't telling these enormous, egregious lies is if he's completely incapable. like just completely incompetent. So and if you want to talk about who's more status quo, Trudeau or Harper, Harper was way more status quo. Trudeau has been way more regressive, way more devastating, done far more damage than Harper ever did, right? Like if the Harper government had have continued on, we'd be just facing the consequences of inaction, right? Whereas with these Trudeau liberals, we're facing the consequences of actively pursuing destruction. Like it's the difference between a person who's like looking at a forest fire and being like, huh, forest fire, okay. And a person who's like actively pouring gas and actively like lighting more fires. Yeah, he's the photogenic PM the urbanite wine moms love. They speak about him using his first name as if they know him personally. It's like a cult of desperate housewives. Yeah, I've experienced it. I've seen it. I've seen people who regard Justin Trudeau with that kind of fawning, doe-eyed love of like a romance novel, like Fabio or something, right? Like they think Justin Trudeau is their boyfriend. Like that, and really, I genuinely do think that a huge amount of his support comes from exclusively that. That if you were to like remove the photo, like remove the picture, and just describe Justin Trudeau to people would be repelled. They would think he's one of the most disgraceful leaders in the nation's history. But then you show them a picture, and they're like, "Oh, dreamy, oh my god," right? And let's be really frank. Like, I do think that there are more than a few people who, when they found out that Justin Trudeau did blackface, that they considered that a feature, not a bug. You know, I think that there's more than a couple of people who are voting for Justin Trudeau, not in spite of, but because of the blackface scandal. Joe Rogan just retweeted Peterson, who retweeted Andy No defending Joe Rogan. So a little incestuous circle there, Seraphim. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, I mean, if Joe Rogan is like it's one thing for Joe Rogan to have Peterson on, to have the disgraceful discussion that they had, but to then retweet it and pretend as though Jordan Peterson is a positive force in some way in the conversation, like. Rogan's gone off the deep end. Like, he's surrounded by right-wing Texans and enormous amount of wealth. Like, there's no one in Joe Rogan's life who is actually saying to him, "Hey, bro, like, you're fucking off the deep end." Like, there's nobody in his life that's confronting him and saying, like, "Hey, man, like, having someone like Jordan Peterson on to embarrass himself about his stupidity and climate change. Like, you should probably have somebody on who actually knows something about climate change, right?" Like, but Rogan doesn't do that anymore, which is why he no longer has intellectual credibility. They're all just circling the wagons on this. Well, I mean, like, if the goal is not to protect the species but to protect capital, right? Like, you have to. And it's just like what I read yesterday, right? There's the reason you can see them doing it. Like, the National Post did the Capitalist Manifesto, which was just pathetic. It was like watching an old man scream about how like things were better back in the day. Lower Saxony, the interior minister just banned people wearing yellow Jewish stars with unvaccinated inscripted on them for downplaying Nazi tyranny. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Like, how insulting. Like, if can you imagine being like a Holocaust survivor and seeing people walking around doing that? Like, get completely fucked. Like, get completely fucked. It's gross. Like, it's gross. And honestly, like, I am really of the opinion that, like, I'm no longer willing to accept this like few bad apples argument. Like, there are people with like Nazi paraphernalia and people doing disgraceful, disgusting stuff like this showing up, and you're not actually fighting back. You're not actually fighting back or pointing out that don't do that, right? Like, your movement sucks. Your movement sucks so bad. Like, it's just gross. Like, it's co-opting a Holocaust in order to cosplay as a victim. Like, that's what it is. Like, that's what they're doing, right? I mean, you're co-opting a Holocaust to cosplay as a victim. Brutal. Brutal. Shouldn't be tolerated. Shouldn't be tolerated at all. Already read that. Getting into the waning minutes here. Oh, yeah. CBC PitchBot is so good. Breaking. Venezuela's Juan Guaido recognizes Pat King as the interim Prime Minister of Canada. I love that Juan Guaido is like the butt of jokes, right? Have you seen the one where the truckers were banging First Nations drum and chanting yabba dabba doo? I don't need to see that video. I know those guys. I'm from Manitoba. I know those guys. There's a reason I don't live in... Thank you, Garden Mice. Thank you very much. Good to see you, Garden Mice. I always love it when you pop up. It's just like a lovely little image. What's the Oi Polo tune? When we see the fash, we let the boots do the talking. Oi Polloi. I don't think I know Oi Polloi. Yeah, this is great meme. I love that Juan Guaido... Leftists use Juan Guaido as like the butt of a joke. He's just literally like create fake stories about how like Juan Guaido, like a clumsy example would be like after the last election, it'd be like Juan Guaido endorses Aaron O'Toole as Prime Minister of Canada, right? Like, just like, I love that he's become this face of mockery and derision, because he should be. He's like one of the most pathetic figures in politics to date, and Justin Trudeau's support of him is an embarrassment, right? Again, something that Stephen Harper would have never done, right? Stephen Harper would have looked at the situation in Venezuela and been like, I mean, Maduro is the leader. Like, he got elected. Like, I don't know what you need to see. You got the UN saying that he's the leader. You got the UN coming out with sanction things. Like, it's what it is, right? Like, he'd obviously have a critique for the Maduro government, for sure. But, like, at least that critique would be somewhat rooted in the reality that Maduro is the actual elected leader. Whereas Justin Trudeau is more than willing to retreat into fantasy, right? He's just taking the cue card and being like, Juan Guaido is leader of Venezuela. Like, that's all he's doing. Yeah, the Canada's lead, Lima Group's choice for leader. Yeah, and I mean, they've gone through 2 elections now. And Juan Guaido is never going to be the leader of that country. Like, it's just never going to happen. And there's this great meme that is starting to come out of the left that I really love, where it's a group of people, like, in a circle, and they're clearly, like, collaborating and talking to one another. Someone, like the United States comes up and says, Juan Guaido is the leader of your country. And then the next panel is that group and a guy coming out with like a thumbs up sign and going like, yep, thumbs up. And then the next panel is them just collaborating again with like Juan Guaido in the United States, like looking at him and being like, hey, just to indicate that like, we're ignoring you now. Like, we don't care what you say. Like, we don't care if you stand up and say that Juan Guaido is the leader of the country. Like, we're not collaborating with you. We don't care what you think, right? I had that very conversation with a conservative and keep saying to me, you see, they're a minority, you should listen to the majority, being called a racist to point out the white supremacist and fascist element in the movement, especially the organizer. They always turn a blind eye to those things. So yeah, if there are 9 people sitting at a table and a known Nazi joins them, there are 10 Nazis sitting at a table. Like, don't organize with Nazis. Like, pretty cut and dry. Like, pretty, and it's so easy to do. Like, that's the thing that blows me away. Just don't do it. Literally, like, oh, a Nazi shows up, I'm going to stand up and walk away, and hope that everybody else joins you. Like, don't be a part of the group. But not surprisingly, Canadians less trusting of governments, politicians as pandemic drags on. Yeah, no shit. Like, no shit. When we have 46% of Canadians saying they still feel anxiety and stress, it's killing a lot of trust in Canada. Yeah. Because we don't trust our politicians, nor should we. I actually think the 46 is on the low side. Like, with only 22% saying they trust governments compared to 40%. Like, for God's sakes, guys, we watched Justin Trudeau erect a basic income called the CERB and then work overtime to dismantle it. Like, that's duplicitous. That's bullshit. Here for the last minute. Exactly, love. Good to see you, man. Good to see you. All right, guys. Yeah. Here's the final thought coming from Dan Price. In the last 4 decades, CEO pay is up 1,322%, and median working pay is up 18%. Can someone explain to me why the 1,322 doesn't contribute to inflation, but the 18% does? All right, guys, like, share, subscribe, spread this around, right? You know the rules. You know how it goes. Always remember, guys, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you don't realize it, because then you'll just stay a commodity. Rebel, revolt, repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.